brought you to me so that you can see the power of prayer.
Eric, you know, by definition, if you deny that something exists, you're actually acknowledging its existence.
Let's take a look at what's happening on the roads.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah!
You're listening to Spice FM. Traffic.
All right, it is a Friday. We expect to see heightened levels of traffic on the roads today by virtue of the fact that we're going into the weekend. Let's look around the city and see what's happening right now. Off Mombasa Road is not so bad right now. Everybody is going into the city centre, and some are using the southern bypass. That's an option now if you're trying to get where you're going quicker. Of course, things have calmed down around the Mwiki Kasarani area. That means that the protests have come to an end, but there'll still be traffic on that road today because those who try to ply the route have to do it extremely slowly to find whatever piece of road they can. Okay, coming off from Gong Road and also Langata Road today, not so bad. It's looking good right now. We've not yet hit traffic hour. We will do that in a short while and let you know how things look in a short while. Okay, we'll see what it looks like. Let us know if there's something you run into that we should share information about. Spice FM KE 0719 012 600. That's the number. Call us. Let us know. We'll spread the word.
Sugar and spice and everything nice. Spice FM.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
26 minutes to 7 o'clock. Good morning and thank you very much for choosing Spice FM. We're broadcasting in Nairobi, 94.4. We're in Mombasa, 87.9. 102.5 in Kisumu. Nakuru, 96.0. 96.7 Eldoret. 90.9 Nyeri. 97.7 in Malindi. Live streaming the show on our digital platforms, Spice FM KE. That's Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, as well as our website, www.spicefm.co.ke. We're taking a look back into the week and ahead into the weekend to see what's happening and what has happened throughout this week in terms of the news coverage. Of course, we know that this weekend there's going to be the political rallies named BBI support forums that are going to be happening. Inside Uhuru Raila plan to woo grassroots. That's what's covered also in the newspapers. Looking ahead into the Buhungu Stadium meeting that's supposed to popularize the BBI in the Western Kenya region. This has locked out some leaders. Remember, Moses Wetangula, Musalia Mudavadi were planning to have theirs elsewhere, and the police have told them, no, you cannot. You can't hold your meeting. There can only be one meeting about this particular issue this weekend.
Eric, does this remind you of some of the things that happened during what we now popularly refer to as the second liberation? When people like the late Charles Rubia, the late Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, the late Shikuku, many lates here.
Kenneth Matiba.
Yes, and some were still alive, Raila Odinga, Orengo, Paul Mwite, a whole bunch of people. They'd want to hold a meeting and it was no go.
Yeah.
But they still went ahead and held their meeting, didn't they? So, unfortunately, this one isn't about liberation, is it?
This one is, it is about liberation.
Oh.
If you ask the people who are championing it,
what exactly would they say they're liberating, and from what are they liberating this thing from?
They're liberating us from perennial fighting during political campaigns and elections. Liberating the country from that start-stop cycle.
Okay. Okay.
We need a way forward. So, yeah, the meetings are going to happen this weekend. This story basically is saying that the president and the former prime minister have mapped out the country as they develop a roadmap for a referendum through consultative forums and rallies amid protests by the Deputy President William Ruto and party leaders Musalia Mudavadi of ANC and Moses Wetangula of Ford Kenya. Mr. Odinga launched the roadmap at a regional convention in Kisii County last Friday, and he will be heading to Kakamega County tomorrow with the BBI brigade for a consultative meeting with the local leadership and a rally at the Buhungu Stadium. Meanwhile, the 10 governors from the Mount Kenya region met on Monday in Nairobi to plan a meeting where they can all speak with one voice on the BBI. Kirinyaga Governor Anne Waiguru yesterday said that they would continue to educate people at the grassroots on the contents of the BBI report as they gather their feedback. So the politicians are now the ones who are gathering their feedback. The team that has been gazetted to gather their feedback has not yet told us how they're going to gather the feedback. It's the same. This is the issue I was raising on Monday. It's okay. Let's hold the meetings, fine. But why not just wait? We have gazetted this team. This whole thing of mapping out the country, it should be done in consultation with the task force that has been gazetted and given the mandate to collect views and feedback from the public and the way forward and the next steps. So hold those meetings in the presence of, for example, the task force. Have the members of the task force at Buhungu Stadium tomorrow. So let's find out how are people going to react to this. Remember what the Speaker of the Senate was telling us the other day. What happens in these meetings is it's speech, mweshimiwa, 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 and then we come up with a declaration. And we say that the people have given their feedback.
The people were there and they have said. Well,
a bit shoddy, this one. A bit shoddy, because really, it's like they're trying to ram through something. It's like, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to go about it.
Yeah.
And let's put aside this issue of this group that we've gazetted.
It's overtaking the agenda.
Yes.
And trying to force through the agenda.
You know,
so at the end of the day, you'll have all this coverage that this is what the people have said. And if the BBI task force comes and gives you anything different, it'll be like, but who told you?
This is making worse a bad situation.
There's an issue here as well, because apparently the DP allies have vowed to hold a parallel rally. Lawmakers accuse the police of sabotage, and they say they will not backtrack on planned weekend meeting in Mumias tomorrow. This now sets the stage for confrontation with the law enforcement authority. Lawmakers are accusing the police of sabotaging their meeting. We were the first group to organize the meeting in Mumias. The BBI meeting in Buhungu is solely meant to undermine our meeting. This is according to Mumias East MP Benjamin Washiali. Former Kakamega Senator Bonnie Halwales read mischief in the ongoing public sensitization forums on the BBI report. So he's reading mischief and he's organizing a meeting.
Well,
politicians, like I told you.
I would be of the view that here are people who are telling us something they understand very well. If you yourself have been known to foment mischief, I think you'd understand the idea quite well, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So you'd be able to recognize it, probably even where it doesn't exist. But remember the utterances we're talking about. Here we are at it again. Full throttle utterances. We did this first. We did this first. First, second, third, fourth.
Doesn't matter. Who cares?
I mean, even if it was 10th, the agenda is clear. But now let's now go to that alternate reality thing. Okay, the concept that I spoke of. How far do they think that they're going to go against it? Because the background against this, the backdrop rather, you know, we talked about the issue of it's a headline that brought this to my attention. Yesterday's Star. Kenyatta elbows Ruto takes over crucial ministries. Okay? Headline. Now, when I went into the details, this is what I found interesting. Somebody actually charted it out nicely and said, give Ruto, Uhuru, share of cabinet slots. They started with 2013. Okay? And they indicated very, very clearly there was a total of 18 slots. 10 of these slots are attributed to the president, 6 to the deputy, and neutral were 2. Okay?
Neutral,
they said, yes. Then they said, let's
Neutral means what? That the president and the deputy president did not...
It didn't, you couldn't determine where the individuals who held those dockets, which side they were leaning to, or who had actually, there was no strong affiliation, so to speak. Then fast forward quickly, moving forward swiftly, to 2020, today, okay? Now we have an interesting thing. We moved from 18, okay, we now have 20 slots. So it looks like the ministries have been increased, okay? President Uhuru now has 15. A deputy president, 5. Just 1. So if I go back to the headline which says, Uhuru elbows Ruto takes over crucial ministries. Essentially, there's only one ministry that was affiliated to the deputy president in 2013 that now doesn't exist. But he has 5. There could be a very delightful debate about whether these ministries are crucial and how crucial they are. But again, you see, this is now something being presented in the headlines and even examples being given. And all that you see in terms of what you call a real loss or affiliation, one. But the way it's presented, it's like
It's colossal.
it was cataclysmic. Okay? Because had this...
But the percentage, so 18 and 6, right? And now 20 with 15 and 5.
Yes. The proportional representation.
This is 25%, and the other one was, what was
18 and 6.
18 and 6
30.
was 30%.
Yes.
So he had more then.
He did in terms of percentage.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is...
He has only lost one.
Precisely.
But you see, the thing is, if we are creating more, then let's continue sharing even as we create. That's where
Now-
the argument comes
now
in.
you've got
Have we
it.
actually created more ministries since 2013?
We have 2 more ministries that we didn't have actually.
Which one?
I have to actually read this.
Yeah,
for,
let's
for,
see.
For me to...
Let's start with the 2013-18 ones.
There was Interior, Devolution, Treasury, Education, Defense, Foreign Affairs, Health, Transport and Infrastructure, ICT, Environment, Water, Natural Resources, Energy, Agriculture, East African Affairs, Commerce, Tourism, Industrialization, Sports, Labor and Social Services.
Okay.
Right there was a division. Okay, right there, the one I've mentioned. Then there was land neutral, land, housing, urban development, and mining. Okay, come now. Interior, devolution, and planning. Okay, so remains. Education, treasury, foreign affairs remain, health, same. Transport, infrastructure, housing, and urban development. We have land. We have ICT, mining, petroleum.
Oh yeah, we have petroleum, and I've seen the other one.
Yes.
It's a public service.
Yes,
public
exactly,
service and youth.
exactly. You've got it. That comes to number 15. The others are the same. So,
All right.
but you see, the politics of it, even if you look at the numbers, in terms of actual significance, if you're talking about so-called influence, you could actually argue, as you're saying correctly, that there should have been a proportional representation with the increase, okay, of 2. So what should he have been given? Half a ministry?
No. Yeah, should have gotten one.
Now,
Split
Or it
those
should have
two.
been split further.
Split those
so that
two.
he gets there's 2
Or if he's still
different.
getting
Yeah.
30% of 2.
Okay. Well,
But in
as
this
though-
particular case, so there are 2 new ministries created.
Yeah.
They have all gone to one side.
Yes.
And then we've hived off agriculture and brought it back to.
yes, exactly. Now, you see, this isn't even the cataclysmic situation that is probably presented or you would anticipate with such a headline. It isn't. Now, if you are talking about the history of people moving and changing political ideas and differing, this is mild. The history of this country, it is mild.
It's mild.
It's very, very mild. Because you could have situations where you would have a total representation of the people who the president prefers simply, just by moving them. You still have the ministries.
Yeah, you
but
just move
could
them
say
around.
All
Yeah,
of them.
yeah.
Yes, this didn't happen.
It didn't happen, of course.
So again, you could ask and you could say, and you could even be answered if you didn't ask, is that what we hear being played out in Western Kenya, okay? It's a narrative that has been there for some time, but it's now gotten a lot of traction because the president seems to be responding. In the past, the president didn't actually respond. No, he'd talk about certain things, leave it. But with these reshuffles and with the change, it is clear that a certain stand has been made.
Yeah.
Now, again, in this very show, I've mentioned that you don't really want to play around with the president of any country. Not really. You don't want to come out and show that you are against this person in any, unless it's something that one may refer to as constructive. Now, constructive in this country apparently must not have anything that seems negative. It doesn't have to be negative. Remember, I'm of the view that Alice Wahome's statement was actually not negative. My view. She was simply speaking openly and saying, this is what I think, this is what I feel.
I agree with your view.
You agree with my view?
Yes.
Yes, I don't think. But if you look at what is playing out in Western Kenya, it's that game. This is not even musical chairs. That game of musical stools, where someone decides that
Three-legged stool.
Three-legged stool. Yes, as opposed to four-legged
Chair.
Yeah, we have a situation. Let's present our case. Since it's in the media, let's now play with words. We were here first. We did this before you. We're having this meeting.
No more joiners.
Yeah, we are being harassed. But harassment. Look at what's happened in the Kasarani area over that particular.
I mean,
Have people not died?
yes.
Somebody has died.
Yes, exactly.
People have
Been injured.
Been injured.
People
Exactly.
have been tear gassed in
Now,
their homes.
ask the question: what were they protesting about?
something that should have been there in the first place.
They are right.
Exactly.
They're right.
A basic right.
The responsibility of government
Basic.
to get things done.
And they didn't start today. This issue has been going on for quite some
entire week.
time. Well, the demonstrations.
The demonstration started this week, but the clamor for some kind
clamor
of
for
attention
change.
has been going on for months.
Yep.
Yes. Good.
Not just
Well-
for months. We'll discuss this in the next hour in detail. The issue of the Kasarani Mwiki road protests and what happened out of that.
Right. 112 schools yet to reopen due to poor facilities. And when we're talking about due to poor facilities, not that they didn't want to open, they would have opened with these poor facilities, but apparently the Ministry of Education has said no. More than 100 schools that have been closed in Central Region are yet to reopen after failing to meet safety standards. Of the 117 schools, only 5 in Murang'a County have complied with the recommendations of the Ministry of Education on safety. Yesterday, Central Education Director Margaret Lisuda said out of the 5 counties in her region, Kiambu was the most affected, with 55 schools still closed over non-compliance on safety. So it's off the top of it. It looks great that the Ministry of Education is pushing
action.
this and is taking action to make sure that, look, full or not, gates bursting or not, we are not going to open these schools unless they comply with safety standards. And for the protection of children, yes, this is a good thing.
You're saying that's on the face of it. What's underneath?
I mean, if this is the case, if that this is what they're really pushing for, to make sure that safety standards are being adhered to, then absolutely, it's a good way to.
Do you support it?
Absolutely, don't open, because
Let
then
them
we go
stay
back to
closed.
what we had in September, whereby safety standards were not kept, and then 8 children died, and we should not go into another year where there is the risk of that happening again.
Indeed. This is a Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. We're taking a look at what's been covered in the headlines and, of course, what makes the news both locally and internationally. The conversation continues as well on our social media platforms, Spice FM KE Facebook, Spice FM KE Twitter, and on YouTube we are live streaming. That Spice FM KE is our channel. It's 11 minutes to 7 o'clock. Good morning.
Spice FM. Spice up your life. Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Nairobi Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko loses bid to block graft case against him. He appeared before Justice Mumbi Ngugi in her ruling yesterday. She said she was not convinced by Sonko's arguments on why the court should intervene and stop criminal case before the magistrate's court. Sonko had faulted the state for preferring charges and investigating him, claiming bias and vested interest by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission officers. Justice Ngugi declined to grant the orders requested by Sonko. I have not heard why that order was not sought before the court, which heard the case in November. I am not also satisfied with the reasons advanced for this court to grant stay of those proceedings. The judge also allowed the state to file its opposition to Sonko's prayers to have more than 3 judges hear the case. In the case, Sonko is fighting the agency's probe into whether he was involved in suspected irregular construction of the Dandora Stadium at 350 million shillings and the suspected loss of 160 million in a garbage collection contract. The agency is also probing Sonko on claims that he may have faked his self-declaration form in the run-up to the 2017 general election. He is also suspected to have been charged before Mombasa law courts in 1997 for making a document without authority. But the governor argues that he's been persecuted out of malice and for fighting land grabbing in the city.
My goodness, it's quite a rap sheet.
Putting up a fight,
Yes.
from all fronts.
And I think it's good. Remember, the positive side of these things is that it expands and it also expounds on our knowledge of the law, but also the debate enables us to actually understand the consequences of some of these things that we've taken for granted for so long. We talk about land grabbing as though it's a national hobby.
Yeah.
And yes, and most times it's actually criminal. We talk about corruption that is seen through procurement processes as though, well, it's these things that people do
It's normal.
and sort of like wait for your turn, and it's criminal, really. So this debate puts it out there, and you can see, because when you have a court case, all these things come out and they're mentioned and they're talked about.
It also brings to the fore the issue of weaponization. We've discussed it many times here. Weaponization of government agencies. So Sonko here basically is saying the investigators are biased against me, and he's presenting reason. He says, I believe the chief investigator in this particular case, we have a tussle with him. There was an issue about a piece of land in South Sea where he says that this person is involved, and because Sonko went and reversed that, whatever was happening in South Sea, that's why this person and his people are against him.
He's opened up a whole new Pandora's box.
Completely.
Because, and it may not work in his favor. Yeah. Because now people will talk of procedure, they'll talk, it's a whole new debate. And if that doesn't hold water, they look for something else along those lines and says, but what about this example, and what about this, and what about this? Oh.
Yes. I like what Justice Mombingogi, however, said, is you just go and apply in the same court. Why are you coming to, this thing of we see people are taken to court, you're charged in the magistrate's court, then you go and apply for something in a higher court. That court stops proceedings in this one until we determine that one. This is what's happening.
Yep.
And we see it all the time. I think one of the reasons why the judiciary is often accused of being the stumbling block in the fight against corruption is because of such things. And these things is not the court that initiates.
No.
It's actually just the parties to the case. They initiate this, so you come to court. If you present a case before a judge and the judge sees, well, there's grounds to what you're saying, the judge has no other alternative but to grant you your wishes. Now, if you start taking long in that process and you delay the previous process, don't blame the judiciary. I think this is where the issue of lawyers come in. The Law Society of Kenya elections will be happening towards the end of February. And towards the end of this month, and in February, we'll be bringing in the candidates for that. I think one of the issues that we'll be raising with them is this. How come lawyers are actually also accused of playing a role in derailing the fight?
They would tell you that what they're doing is just
their job.
Yes, exactly. Their job is to actually represent their client, and they will
this
use
is the best
every
way to
means
help
within
necessary.
the law. Because in taking this matter to another court, have they broken the law? I think
They
the answer
haven't
is
not.
no, they have not. Now it's up to the judges to make a definitive or take a definitive position, such as the one Justice Mumbi has taken, and say, "Excuse me, this matter should actually go back to the court where this thing is actually being." Yes, there's no reason why it can't be. And there's no reason why you should bring it to yet a new judge.
And speeding it up as well. Because you find, so a case is taken to court, either the prosecution is taking so long to give the evidence to the defense. So every time they go for mention of the case, the defense is like, we have not been supplied with all the information or the material that we need to commence this case. Both lawyers on both sides, because even the prosecutors are lawyers, they play a very bad game sometimes.
Yeah, of course, time wasting is something that's used as a tactic in very many cases.
What can you do as a judge? If the defense says we haven't received, and you give an order and say, why don't you give them the material?
They'll say they're preparing and
They're
they need a
preparing
couple of weeks to prepare this information, and they'll send it across, which is, like I said, it's often used, and it seems like then the hands are tied in terms of how fast you can then, expedite the process. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen.
Maybe the judges and magistrates should be more strict and say, I give you until this date.
I think
if
so.
you haven't, go to jail.
But,
Either your case is thrown out, or
they do have the capacity to make certain
decisions
about time.
Yes.
For instance.
Yes.
And say, look,
what are we doing?
You have this length of time, as you correctly put it. Please come back to me within that time.
Yeah.
I know of cases that have gone to a judge and they're supposed to be weighty. And the judge says, I've listened to this case. Come back in 1 week. I'm giving you a ruling.
We're not even going to go through the
In a
process.
1 week. And come to my chambers.
Not even here in the courthouse.
Yes. I've listened and I've understood what you're saying, and what you've presented. Come back after 1 week and come to my chambers, and come early in the morning,
so that we can get you out of the
First
way
thing.
and then attend to other business that
I'm
is
starting
necessary.
at 7, which means be there by 6:30.
First thing.
Say 7 we start.
So that we can get other work done.
By the time the court opens at say 8 o'clock, that matter is concluded,
It's
done,
done.
finished. Yes,
When
you're
we
gonna
move
on.
Yes, if you want to go and appeal, whatever you want to do, but that judge has finished.
That process.
Yes, it's a decision that judges can actually make.
So a diplomatic row is brewing between Kenya and Uganda over, guess what?
Milk.
Milk.
I
Is it
saw
now?
it coming.
Yes. now.
Milk everywhere and not a drop to
And
drink.
not a drop to drink, not a drop to dehydrate. Following a move by Kenyan officials to impound more than 36 million shillings worth of milk products imported from Uganda. Uganda is now accusing Kenya of violating the East African Community Protocol by impounding 43,000 kilograms of milk powder and 262,632 litres of the Lato milk brand owned by Pearl Dairy Farms. The government of the Republic of Uganda, I quote, protests the manner in which authorities in Kenya have continued to deliberately constrain and impose unwarranted restrictions on the smooth importation of Uganda's milk and milk products into Kenya, and is deeply concerned about the illegal seizure of Ugandan-made milk under the Lato brand by authorities in Kenya on allegations that they are contraband, counterfeit and substandard. And this was according to Uganda's Ministry for Foreign Affairs in a letter sent to the Kenya High Commission in Kampala yesterday. So here we are, and there's an element of protectionism on the side of Kenya, but is then seen as an element of harassment on the side of Uganda. And so the words have started swapping sides, and we're likely to see this more. Also then depends on, it's not going to be easy. Also then depends on how tight the screws are going to be put in by Agriculture CS.
It isn't also the first time we've had this disagreement. We've had two major disagreements, one on the SGR and one on the pipeline. Remember, with the SGR, the discussions during the first term of this particular presidency, Tanzania had been brought in, as had been Rwanda, and then something strangely happened. The cost of the railway went up. These fellows pulled out. Okay? Something similar, and then there was a third party that was supposed to be involved in this. Essentially, the discussion got a little confusing with the issue of the pipeline. It had been agreed on. Then costs was thrown in again. So it just joins a list of issues that we've had. Now remember, Tanzania and us had similar issues, and it was reported many chickens died.
Chickens, cattle were impounded. Tourism vans were also not being allowed to cross over. Many things. But this one particular one about milk and, the impounding of the milk and branding it as unsafe and counterfeit and all that.
And to understand that this particular brand is quite popular in Kenya, from what I'm made to understand.
Yes,
widely popular here.
It took the market by storm.
Yes,
and we've never heard of complaints arising from the usage of this particular product.
Exactly.
If anything, you've heard praise.
Yes. Exactly. So this is one that's going to be for the books as far as I see.
Let us see how it plays out. This is a conversation that it continues on our social media platforms, Spice FM KE, Facebook, at Spice FM KE on Twitter, and also join the conversation by live streaming on YouTube. Spice FM KE is our channel. www.spicefm.co.ke. 7 o'clock.
Spice up your life. Spice FM. Nakuru.
Wow, so it's taking an hour from Kitengela to GM on Mombasa Road this morning, and that means, yes, we are firmly in the throes of traffic hour, and it's a Friday morning, folks, so you're going to understand that we're going to see quite a lot of it around the city. So Mombasa Road, of course, giving up those vibes that we're not really interested in, but you know what? You're going to have to sit tight. The Southern Bypass, though, is an option, folks, if you want to use that. Those heading to town via Langata Road, traffic starts at the barracks, and it is absolutely slow. Please, though, do drive safely and put on your seatbelt, folks. Why are you not wearing your seatbelts? Wear your seatbelts so we can also be safe as well as get out of trouble. Mwiki Matatus are back on the road, and of course this means this was after there was a truce or stalemate so far to make sure that at least that traffic burden is eased. There's traffic on Wayaki Way all the way from Kangemi. If you can pass using the Loresho side, you would be better off trying to get into the city. All right, apart from that, everything seems okay. We'll let you know. Thika Road seems to be a bit of a mess right now. If we find an alternative, I will be sure to let you know in a short while. But for now, stay safe, be patient, and let us know if you find an alternate for Thika Road or anywhere else. Spice FM KE is a handle on Twitter. Give us a call. You know the number, 0719 012 600.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latin, agent provocateur, the man in the chair, seasoned journalist, news hound,
3 minutes
a
past
man
7
who
o'clock. Good
believes
morning.
in
This is
punching
the
up,
Situation Room. It's
not
Kenya's
down.
biggest conversation.
This
Of course, what
is the
happens here
Situation
is we
Room,
live stream the
the
show
only
every
way
morning
to
on
start
Spice
your
FM
day.
KE, Facebook, Spice FM KE, Twitter, and we're on YouTube channel, Spice FM KE. We're broadcasting from Nairobi on 94.4. We're in Mombasa, 87.9, 102.5 in Kisumu, 96.0 in Nakuru, Eldoret, 96.7, 90.9 in Nyeri, Malindi, 97.7. Now, the issue of Nairobi is one that we've discussed many times before. And we've also discussed how the city is being managed, how people's, the plight of the residents of Nairobi is being addressed. Last week, the Nairobi County Assembly met and they discussed how to address the leadership crisis that's affecting the county. And what did they agree? They agreed that the Nairobi Regeneration Committee, that's spearheaded by Cabinet Secretary for Tourism, Najib Balala, that has some officials from the national government and from the county government, should come together and work with the County Executive Committee of Nairobi to manage the affairs of the Nairobi County Executive. Now, since then, we have seen a lot of things also still happening. People in Nairobi have started protesting, saying we have dilapidated roads that need to be recarpeted, roads that need to be rehabilitated, which is what the Regeneration Committee was actually set up to do. And that's among the first things that it came to do. Regeneration is, recarpeting the many roads in Nairobi that required addressing. So when the people of Kasarani Mwiki went to the streets earlier this week, and they started protesting and saying, we want this issue addressed because this is no longer a road. We have huge gaping potholes on this area. And our matatus, for example, cannot operate in this route. That's why the matatus pulled out. What did we see happening? The police reacted the way the police react. They went to quell the demonstrations. There was a scuffle between the demonstrators and the police. It has led to the death of one person. It has led to the death of closure of some schools that had opened. Why? Because pupils are going to school, but then because of the demonstrations of tear gas, the teachers have deemed it fit not to have the schools in session until this matter is resolved. Yesterday, the Senator for Nairobi, Johnson Sakaja, brought together people from various agencies. One is the Kenya Urban Roads Agency, that is KURA. He also brought in the Matatu Owners Association, applying that route. Also brought in the leadership of the demonstrators and local leaders. And they agreed, let's stop the demonstrations. Let the KURA address this issue by immediately sending a contractor on the ground to start recarpeting this road. And let's normalize this situation. I say it's a good thing that Johnson Sakaja stepped in. It's a good thing that the leadership took over this. But I'm saying it's not enough. We should look at why did we get to this situation in the first place? Why is it that the agency that is responsible for updating and managing roads in Nairobi had not done this, had not even gone to address the situation on the ground? Why is it that now, after many people have demonstrated, one person has died, is when you're allocating money to get to the ground? I think action should be taken on the officials of the Kenya Urban Roads Authority.
Did you think we should begin with arresting them?
Yes.
Good. This is good.
City likes this.
Well, yes, they should be. Because did they provide us with reasons as to why that road was incomplete or the condition it was in was what it was? No. The complaints that preceded the demonstrations were a manifestation of what was wrong. Did they see it fit? Did they deem it necessary for them to actually comment? No. Now, we know who was awarded that particular contract. We know who is supposed to supervise it. So it's not as though we don't know the culprits. We do know.
Everybody's known.
Everybody's known. So now, what action do we see the government taking against these people? Because everything that has arisen because of them not doing what they're supposed to do.
The problem here is what we keep seeing in government. So you complain about something and then they take action. And you look back and wonder, there's somebody whose job, you only had one job. Your job was to make sure that all the roads in the urban areas of this country are in good condition, in proper condition. When these people were starting to demonstrate, it's not because there were 1 or 2 potholes.
No.
It's because there were gullies.
There was just 1 or 2 bits of road.
No, actually, this one there was none.
There was no road.
Zero.
That, man, it's something else. It's like a series of craters.
Exactly.
Yes.
So craters have actually formed in a whole section, and
Yes.
it's more than a kilometer long.
Yes.
And the agency that's supposed to make sure that this does not happen is sitting pretty.
Yes. Not
And,
commenting,
not
not
commenting.
telling you anything.
Not appearing on the ground and
No.
saying, even if you have contracted somebody to come and start working, pushing to ensure the contractor is on the ground. Do the first things first. If you need first aid on the road because people still need to use this road, do whatever needs to be done so that people can access the road. This has not happened for so long.
Nothing.
Not the only road in Nairobi, Gitanga Road. At, when you're going up towards Kawangware, same thing.
Hey,
Huge potholes.
man, there's some sections there.
And you wonder, we have somebody whose job it is to actually work on this road. They are nowhere. What is going to happen? The people of Kawangware are also going to join the demonstrations. They'll demonstrate, and then we'll see the local leadership, Simba Arati maybe, or then still the senator of Nairobi, saying, let me take leadership on this.
Why must the senator actually be brought into this
Why?
fray when there are people who are tasked with this job and they should be doing it?
Because obviously there was a loud silence coming from them, and they saw the state of anarchy really that it had risen to, or that it had finally resulted at. And he said, look, I'm not going to sit around and watch this continue. If something needs to be done, let me step in and get done, because everybody else was sitting the fool, as it were, and nobody was actually opening their mouth to say we need to do something about this. And then we get to the point where tear gas is being thrown all over the place. Day after day, people have said, you know what, come rain, come sunshine, hell or high water, we are going to stay here and continue to protest until something is done. But I do agree that we keep treating the symptoms as opposed to dealing with the problem. Because as is all things natural, they will fix this road, they will, but it will deteriorate. Because of the fact that it's still in use, it will deteriorate. So then whereas in terms of long-term action to make sure that all of this is looked at collectively, it's looked at as a whole to say this is actually our job, and we don't need to wait for a protest for something to be done. We don't need to wait for a protest for maintenance, which is our core mandate, to happen. Because people think that their job is just to, if we look at Kenya Urban Roads Authority, that their job is just to build roads. No, it's not. The job of maintenance is just as important as that of building from the beginning. Maintenance, making sure that you're doing an audit year in, year out, every 6 months, biannually, whatever it is, that you're doing an audit to make sure things are in proper condition. And I think that a lot of times we forget that aspect of development, that really that maintenance and management of what actually still exists is something that is quite important. We say you've built a road and then you take off and you're fine. They say, well, we built that road in 2012. What are you talking about? Kind of thing, without actually having gone back to say this is where we are.
They'll talk about resources. I'm sure they'll tell you, we only have a limited resources. And in our resources, once we've highlighted that this is an area that needs to be worked on, we identify a contractor and we contract this person to work on the road. Our resources are limited.
I also fault the area MP here to a high degree, because her job was then because these are some of the things they legislate for when they're sitting, in the house, even not just sitting on the floor of the house, but also in their everyday, because you're right there.
This is where
this is something that you take and carry forward, because essentially that's your job. You see what's happening on the ground, you carry it forward.
You assume the MP lives there, don't you?
Even if you would assume that she would
the
be.
MP for Kasarani is Mercy Gakuya.
Yeah, you would assume that she was visiting every now and then. No, let's not even go far. You would assume that from Monday, when these protests began, she would say, okay, forget the fact that I've not been here for the last 1 year, whatever.
But
now that there are protests, here I am,
up.
and I'm going to take this up. But no, that didn't happen either. So really, the issue is not the road. and that there were potholes and that was sorted.
Yeah.
The issue is the attitude of complacency and mediocrity that we continue to deal with leaders when they say, look, we are not going to get this done. Or with institutions who've been mandated to get the job done. We did it once and that's enough. No. It's a continuous cycle that needs to take place. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in these degrading situations more and more often.
Let's also talk about the area MCA. Because, you see, this is among the things. The Kura and the local government work hand in hand. The area MCA should actually be raising these issues in the county assembly. Now, they're in recess or whatever, but it doesn't matter. You should be advocating and pushing.
If being in recess doesn't excuse you.
You can still access
his job as MCA is not in recess.
Maybe they're still
They're
earning
still
salary.
earning salary.
They're still earning salary even when they're on recess. So please.
Their schedule for meeting in the county assembly is what is in recess. The job is not in recess.
The work is still ongoing.
Yes, it's ongoing.
He's still the MCA
Yes, it's
of
still
the
the
area.
MCA.
The
He should have been
constituents
able
didn't die.
He should be able to actually go and address these issues. We keep talking about, officers in government who are doing their job, and they're doing their job in a manner that, is not satisfactory to the people who pay them, and that's the taxpayer. This is one glaring example. People go out to demonstrate because there is no road where there should have been a road. And this is an urban road. This is Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya.
Of Kenya.
Really. And it's not the only road. You have many other roads. I'm sure when you open up the phone lines, you'll hear people calling from various parts of the country in major towns saying, we have a problem with the roads here. And the agency responsible for it just goes, sits in a meeting, says, tumesikia mheshimiwa, addresses the senator and says, in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have personnel on the ground tomorrow. And then they're going to take for whatever length of time to patch up the road or to fix it properly. Whatever. Let's give them the benefit of doubt and say they're going to fix it properly, but over time. I've seen an example of the same Agwins Kothek Road near Yaya Center. They actually had closed off that road for a couple of days because they were working on it. It had also started forming gullies. They closed it off. They opened it. Well, you think it has tarmac? No.
They just filled the gullies.
They just filled the gullies. It
And
rained
somebody
on
was
Monday.
contracted and paid a hefty sum,
Of course,
to make sure that it was done and carpeted to,
It rained
world-class
and
value.
we were back to factory settings.
Reset.
Kabisa.
We're back there. I'm sure they're going to close off that road again. Just there, the near center. This is a main road, actually. If you think about Agwins Kothek Road and where it leads, so it's the same road that leads. If you live in Kawangware, you're using Agwins Kothek, and then you join Gitanga Road.
Yes.
So how long will it take you to get home? Surely, road is closed here. There's no road in the entire area of Kawangware. People have been complaining. You see this on social media all the time.
In fact,
People
one
are
could
posting
argue
pictures.
that the traffic lights you have are not necessary.
No.
You are going to slow
You're
down
going to
anyway.
slow down anyway.
Seriously,
You're
will
not
slow
going to
down.
lurch ahead because
No.
you're afraid of what you
No.
will find in
No.
front of you, essentially.
There's the other aspect of this as well. The fact that the people power has triumphed again, right? People came out, people said, we are not going back. Yes, shooters, killers, we will be back here until you address our issues. And the issue has not been addressed because people have realized that unless we take matters in our own hands, unless we actually stop talking to you from, asking the media to come and help us or saying, let's go and talk to our area leadership, this is the MCA or the MP, unless we actually come out and protest and demonstrate and picket, this is not going to be addressed. People power has won yet again. And this is a government that should not be allowing people to be getting out of their homes to do this kind of thing. Because when it starts, where will it stop? This is why I have a problem with actually addressing the people power side and saying, government, please ensure that people who are not doing their jobs are taking action against. 16 minutes after 7 o'clock, this is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice F.
Well, definitely looking at what or how impactful the voice of the people can be when you're trying to agitate for certain kinds of change or reform in government. I think it definitely is a tool that can be used. And here we have a glaring example of how it works. The people got to look, they didn't start speaking on Monday. It just happened that they got into the streets and started protesting on Monday. But they've been having dialogue, they've been talking, they've been asking, they've been requesting, they've been demanding for years. And because now, as you see the details of how this actually plays out, this road did not start having a problem over Christmas. It was over time, and they started to speak about it and said, look, help us out here, really help us out for something that is our right. Help us out here. And looking at the whole profile of the country, like you said, in a capital city, we shouldn't have such a situation. We shouldn't have such a situation when it comes to urban roads, any roads actually. And the people began to speak and nobody listened. And when they took it up a notch higher to protest level is when people sat up, ears perked, paid attention. And it sounds like you want to say don't go to that extent, but it looks to me that if you don't go to that extent, I can bet you a pretty penny that
nothing will happen.
If they had not gone to the streets the way they did from Monday to Thursday, what we see here, where was all this money before? All this 1.7 billion and 300 million that suddenly found its way out of coffers, suddenly appeared magically. Where was it before? And this money, it's okay for them to allocate it to this road, which means it could have been done previously. You want to ask yourself, where was it? Where was it? But it seems to me that protesting actually does make an impact. It makes people sit up and notice. You don't want people dying. You don't want the tear gas canisters flying all over the place. You don't want to hurt people. I'm saying you don't want to. You don't want to do that. But it seems that it is a necessary evil to use or to employ to get people to do their job.
And to do their job properly.
Right.
Because as well, you see in many cases where a contractor is sent to the road and the kind of work that they do is shoddy. And you have somebody from the government who's supposed to come and inspect and approve of the work that's being done. They actually come and sign off against some very, very shoddy work.
It's the same malady that reigned, remember, in our construction industry. You'd find buildings collapsing.
Yes.
In the following days, you would hear of someone being arrested,
taken to court.
And how often do you hear the consequences of that when it is clear what they should have been doing, what they shouldn't do? The players in that particular arena are known. Why they aren't brought in quickly, given their case fast-tracked and them taken to a correctional facility that suits the sort of offense that they have caused the general public. Why this isn't done, one wonders all the time. Because,
actually, yeah.
Yes.
It is beside me.
And usually people die.
Look, I keep going back to the private sector. Look at the private sector. What happens if you don't do your job?
Oh, gone.
Immediately.
In fact, maybe they give you a warning or they put you on some kind of probationary.
In quick succession.
Right?
Yes.
There's a warning.
Even before you're able to react to that first warning,
you're
get a second
put on. There's a very long term that they use. You're put on some 3 months where they basically watch your.
It's called probation.
No, even after the probation, before you're confirmed. Now, when you're put on, there's a word I can't remember. I'll remember at some point on the tip of my tongue. But you're put on some kind of, holiday in brackets. And then even after those 3 months, you don't perform after they've put you on that watch list, you will go home. They have warned you,
and
you will
clear.
go home. And it's clear that you didn't do this, go home. So here you are mandated, you have a certain
usually
responsibility.
it's compliant with the Employment Act.
Yes.
If that didn't exist, they'd kick you out
They'd
on
kick
that
you out.
on that
On
very
the
day
spot.
they didn't want you.
On the
Yes.
spot. What? You were supposed to do this and you didn't?
Out.
And as a result of you not doing your job,
Our bottom line
other
is
things,
impacted.
exactly, other things were impacted. If we want to look at the general economy of that area and then how it applies then to the country, how much was lost between Monday and Thursday?
Yes.
When Matatus decided that they're going to go on strike in terms of income to the economy.
When people took
What
longer
happened?
to get to work.
People took longer to get to work and all sorts of things happened as a result of that. People had to walk.
Now schools have to be closed.
Yes.
Schools were closed.
Schools were
right?
closed, yeah.
Imagine somebody who's going to seek medical treatment and they require to be ferried.
So which would you rather avoid? Wouldn't you rather than avoid all this loss? Because if it was going to be enumerated in terms of really how much was lost, I'm sure we would be dealing with some
Do
staggering
we have
figures.
any record of the MCA bring up the issue? No.
No.
Where?
Do we have a record of the
MP bring up?
No. They should be
Did they
lumped
even
in with
go
this group.
there?
Did
They
the
didn't
MP
even
join
go
the
there.
process or
No.
even go to address the
No.
protest?
We had a former MP visit the area. The one who clearly, if he opens his mouth today, has no impact in terms of what is going to be done governing that constituency. Nothing. But he just went to, offer his support.
Yep.
The one who is tasked currently with working in that area didn't even bother to blink an eyelid. really, what is it that we're dealing with? And I keep saying that, you know what? It's not the thing that we look at that's the monster. It is the consequences of the action or inaction that we need to be looking at, that we say this is where we are and this is where we stand. How many people lost money? People pay loans on a daily basis. How many people then were not able to pay their loans for those 4 days? How many people were not able to take product to market? How many people were not able to attend school? How many people were not able to attend their jobs on time and then got a warning after that? Now, when you look at the consequences of this kind of inaction, then we see really then how bothersome it is. And the only option then is to, yes, as CT says, let these people be arrested. What are we talking about?
Start with the arrest, because what hasn't been done is clear.
Yeah.
All right? And then I think the government is allowed to hold people for a certain number of
As you
days.
build a case.
As you build a case. But this one, you don't need to build a case. It's clear what ought to have been done and it hasn't been done. I mean, can it get clearer than
And
this?
there's somebody whose responsibility
And we
is
even
that.
know which group of people are responsible.
If you look at Kura, for example, I'm sure under Kura, look at the Director General and everybody else. But there's somebody whose job is...
For that specific area? Yes, there are people.
Somebody who's
And they're paid to do that.
Of course. They've been earning a salary and they've been reporting to work every morning and they've been reading the newspaper and, taking calls and maybe even writing reports. What have they been saying? If they say that they've been pushing for the release of this 300 million shillings, did it take Sakaja to actually press the button for 300 million shillings to be released and have a contractor on the ground immediately? Did it take Sakaja? Why must Sakaja be the one who's calling this meeting in the first place? Do your job anyway.
It means everyone in that chain who was supposed to do their duty did not do what they are supposed to do. Quite simply that.
Simply so.
And you see, again, the contention I've had over these issues is that how do you classify this? Is it neglect? Is it irresponsibility? Is it incompetence? No. This is crime against humanity.
Straight up there.
This one you
We
fast
can
forward.
combine all those things.
Yes, but it's crime.
Incompetence, and
Look,
then
when you deny people certain basic rights that have been afforded for them, the country has ensured there's a budget for it. It's been allocated. People have been given the job to begin that particular... Everything that needs to be done has been done. And then a few people just guarantee that thing doesn't get done. Surely. And it's affecting the lives of many people. It is a crime against those people. So it is a crime against humanity.
oftentimes you go for the elected leaders. So in this particular case, if the governor was still in office, would be saying, look, we elected Sonko. What has Sonko done? We are actually even talking about the elected leaders, the leadership, the MCA and the MP. We're asking, what is it that they've done? What they could do, the MCA and the MP, is agitate, is advocate the issue.
They didn't agitate.
But
No,
there's
they didn't.
somebody who does not even need to be reminded. Somebody's job is to wake up, dress, get to work, deal with the issue of the whole entire
As in, that
region.
is your job.
That
So
is your
if you
job.
didn't do this, then
Eric,
essentially
you
you're
You don't
asking
need
yourself,
somebody to
what
come
did
to your
you do
office
every day for a year?
unajua kuna barabara pale imeharibika. That's what you should be doing anyway. You should be going to inspect
I mean,
what's the state of roads.
Consider the history, as Ndu has actually correctly put it. How often must people agitate and ensure that things that are actually rightfully supposed to be done for them is actually done? I mean, surely. Then, if that is the case, then why do you need all these people?
Why are they there?
Why doesn't the public just deal directly
Yeah.
with the
With the treasury.
directly?
Give us the money. Let us identify a contractor.
Yes.
If we want to do the road by ourselves, just pay us.
Yes.
We will do the road. Pictures are emerging out of Gitanga now that we've talked about it. So Gitanga Road, apparently, somebody has gone and, poured some stones. You know, the way they pour heaps of stones, a tipper comes and there are heaps of stones on that road. They haven't been seen since.
The really marvelous thing about that is then they're going to cover it with mud.
Yes. They haven't been seen since. You wonder what they're waiting for. They're waiting for...
Not maram, not aggregate, mud. So one small shower, one matatu just goes
washes
over.
off.
Done. One.
We're back to square one.
Exactly.
Because we want more money. And somebody signs it off. Somebody actually signs off and says, yes, this is... What are the words that we're using with the pending bills? Verified invoice. This is a verified invoice. Job was done. They are due for payment. Somebody gets paid.
The procedures to these things are so clear. Nothing could get clearer than this. But, what is of even greater importance and significance is that if you are looking for people who should be brought to book, these fellows don't require too much investigation. Not really. Road to be built, money given. If not given, tell us. why you haven't, whatever, but end of story, not done. Please let them come in and assist us with the investigations.
Infrastructure is said to be, one of the key agenda for the government, right? And the government has really put in a lot of emphasis on infrastructure development. You even have split those two departments, transport and infrastructure, as different. One deals with transport issues and congestion. Another one deals with building infrastructure for the country, including the railway and such, and airports. Now, with such kind of emphasis, and then you go to the capital city of the country, and you find the state of disrepair of the roads, you start asking yourself, when the government says we have done 80,000 kilometers of roads, where are those 80,000 kilometers? Is it just for show? If where you have serious population concentration, you don't have good roads, what's the point of having a road in a low density area? Start with where actually people are using the road. People need to use the road. These are areas in Nairobi, for example.
And the area we're now speaking of is a high density area.
It's a very high density area.
Yeah, quite. Then you have to ask yourself, then, is the priority highways? And then to say, okay, are they then looking for linkages country to country, as opposed to dealing with where the people are, first of all? Or should it be a combined effort? And I think that's where we see. Because previously they were said, there's no money. But I'm asking myself, where did this money then, 300 million, miraculously come from? Where did it come from?
Immediately.
Yeah.
And a contractor on the ground immediately. That means that the contractor had already, this procurement process had happened.
So somebody decided that they just were not going to do what
But you know what is worse is that before the contractor came, that road was possible. It was possible. Yes, it's when they dug it up and then did whatever it is that they
left
do.
It there.
Then the problems began. It was a bad road, yes, but it was possible. Did you ever hear of matatus sort of like protesting and not going? No. They knew, okay, iffy road, but manageable. Then they came in and somehow everything now went to the dogs, so to speak. Now here we're giving dogs a bad name, but nonetheless, let's say they went south, okay? And they've continued going south.
Let's take a look at what's happening on the roads. And then we come back and have a discussion on why the roads are the way they are this morning. And then we'll also look at what else can we do as citizens to ensure that the government does what it's supposed to do, including seeking legal redress. For example, should the people of Wiki go and seek compensation for loss of livelihood, for whatever
they must.
And matatus that were also impacted in this, somebody must pay for what has happened in Kasarani Mwiki and the other roads of Nairobi. We must set an example. It's 7:30. Good morning.
Traffic.
All right. Everybody's trying to get in and out of industrial area this morning. There's quite the traffic situation there. And we're just going to look a little bit further east. And that shows us that there's a major jam on Jogo Road as you approach the City Stadium roundabout. All the border gentlemen and ladies, as it were, have decided to block the road near the City Stadium because one of them was knocked down. And this is going to affect traffic going into the CBD and also coming inbound on Jogo Road. And it's already affecting what we see happening in industrial area. Lunga Road is not moving. Someone says imeshikana kama locust. There's a reason why everybody's asking. Mombasa Road at the Gateway Mall, the slip road moves faster than the main Mombasa Road. Of course, everybody using the road that would lead to the inland container depot area, so that will help you get out to the General Motors a lot faster this morning. All right, so looking at different parts, Junction Mall, Ngong Road is an absolute nightmare this morning. It's traffic all the way. So really right now, wherever you look, there is traffic. It is Friday morning and it is definitely smack middle of traffic hour all the way from Wayaki Way to Kiambu Road as well. So we're dealing with the traffic situation there. Keep tight, or rather sit tight and be patient. It'll open up soon enough.
Spice and everything nice. Alright, okay.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM,
28.
Nairobi.
Good morning, and how are you doing? This is the Situation Room. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. In the room, my name is Eric Lati. We have CT Muga and Ndu Oko. Now, we're discussing the state of our roads, especially in the urban areas. Nairobi, to be specific, where we've seen demonstrations going to 4 days in Kisarani Mwiki. And this had to be resolved by the Senator for Nairobi, Johnson Sakaja, bringing together the leadership of the area, bringing together security agencies, because one person had been killed during those protests. People were injured in the protests. People were tear gassed in their houses. Schools had to be closed because of the demonstrations. And also, they brought in the Kenya Urban Roads Authority into the meeting. And immediately they decided that, well, we are going to have the contractor on the ground. 300 million shillings is going to be released so that this road can be done and completed. Now, why does it have to take people to protest for 4 days for somebody to do what they are supposed to do? And they're getting a salary at the end of this month, and last month they got a salary
By
from
the
the taxpayer.
way, these fellows are a fairly organized bunch. I mean, let's not assume they're not organized. If you look at their website, one of the things that they actually do, you have all the projects that are ongoing right now.
Listed.
Listed. And under that listing, they will tell you the distance that particular project is supposed to cover. They'll tell you who the contractor is. They'll tell you the status, 47%, 20%, 30%. They'll tell you the county that road is in. They will even tell you the cost of that road rather. Hey, Eric, it's infectious. Red
Thing that you
lorry,
started doing
yellow
on Monday.
lorry. Okay.
Do you see? Monday, things
Yes.
happen to take, they rise
But
by storm. By Friday, they caught
Friday,
on.
they
They
caught
they take it further. They even tell you of what is proposed and give you the same details. So it isn't that they are organized. No,
They're
sorry.
disorganized.
No.
They are very organized.
They're an organized bunch. What happened here?
They're engineers.
Yes, these are organized fellows. What happened here? And by the way, those details are available. What is interesting, they update it.
Glaring questions.
Yes.
Who's the contractor for the Kasarani Mwiki? You'll find it as we
I'm
continue.
sure if we look at it,
You'll
I'll
find
be
it
able to
as we
find
continue.
it. Yes.
Because there's a contractor who's on the ground, there's a contractor who's supposed to be working on this, there's a contractor who should be finishing up the road. Now, surely
There's probably a contractor who was paid.
some down payment.
Do you get? Somebody received money to
Somebody
do
has
something,
yes.
and it was not done. Now, I keep going back to the fact that if you do, in some cases where things become so ridiculously inexplicable, that then protests are necessary to have. And we can see around the world, because we want to ask ourselves, okay, fine, and this doesn't, look, of course, everybody's going to say that Ndu is the advocate for getting people to get out into the streets and make some noise. Look, we've seen cases whereby people have been quiet, and in terms of then opening their mouths have gone dormant. But we also have seen where, and this is one case where it's extremely clear that until you get out and make some noise, nothing is going to happen. We go back to the account of Chile, and they've been in the streets. They've been protesting for the last 6 months, and finally, what do we see this year, March? There will be a referendum whereby parts of the constitution are changed to make sure that you see there's equitable distribution of resources, so that you close the gap between the rich and the poor, direct as a result of protests. Had those protests not taken place to the magnitude that they had, we would not be seeing these constitutional changes. You want to talk about what happened, the Women's March in Washington, that was many, many years ago. And what happened as a result of that? Suffrage then came into play. Then women got a chance to vote. Had that march not happened, people would not have sat up and taken notice and said, okay, yeah, women, okay, maybe we need to give them an opportunity. Without the March on Washington, that would not have happened. And there are very many examples around the world whereby, if we keep quiet and sit, the chances of anything being done about it are close to nil. But, and of course, it's not saying go out and kill people and be violent, but go out and stand your ground and say, until this happens,
Picket.
this will not.
Push until something happens.
And then you want to say, does it happen in Africa? And I give examples of what happened in Nigeria in 2010 when the subsidies on fuel were removed. In a country that produces oil, you're still charging your people heftily for this. And then the subsidies were then removed on oil. People said, we are not going to work. 2 days, Lagos was at a standstill. Understand that this is a $24 million a day economy. So you can imagine, people said we're not going to work. Banks closed, schools closed, hospitals closed, public transport closed. The city was dead for 2 days. Government said, okay, all right, let's have a discussion.
Let's discuss. You know, I support protesting and demonstrations at that bigger, grander scale of things. You know, when you're talking about policy change, constitutional change, that it's fine. We can have a discussion about people going out, milling onto the streets. But when you have to protest about the basics, I think that points to a failure, and a very big failure. This is not even about, you know, agitating where the government is not seeing your point. This is about somebody who's not doing their job, the government not doing its job. You shouldn't be protesting about things like, you know, the state of roads. You shouldn't be protesting about some things like even price of bread, like we saw in Sudan. These are basics. Somebody should actually be able to see this is what is required.
Yeah, but if you want to, if you want to look at, you want to apply an element of realism here, this is what it is. In an ideal situation, so now you're playing idealism versus realism. Idealism should be that it should not be. You shouldn't have to protest about such things that are basic needs.
It wastes your time because on a daily basis, then you'll be protesting about one thing. Today you'll protest about the school. Tomorrow it'll be about the road. The other day it'll be about the local shopping center.
Then they should be ready to deal.
You should not be having to protest on a daily basis.
But then now those who sit, or those who are the custodians of governance in countries, then should be able to deal with that. If you don't want to deal with the process and the noise you're going to continue to hear in your ears, if you don't do your job, then do your job.
But look at the anatomy of protest. Why do people protest? A protest is actually a consequence. These things don't start with a protest.
Of course not. They're events leading
As you say,
to...
small.
Yeah, small, yeah.
Yes. There's a discussion, people are unhappy. They probably follow procedure, talk to the MCA,
Yes.
talk to so and so.
Visit the MCA has happened.
Yes, who do we write to? Who do we go to in the county? By the time people galvanize themselves together into large groupings and they start demonstrating,
They've had enough.
that thing didn't take. Whatever you're seeing is a manifestation of something that took place over a long period of time. Okay? Now, there are consequences to it. For instance, there's this particular wall that was being built in the Kasarani area around the stadium went down. What you then do is you unleash some of the more unsavory characters within that particular community to do the things that they do best.
Yeah.
Okay? Thugs are unleashed into that arena. Okay? In the name of protests. And then real protesters do what they had intended to do. And what do you know? That economy grinds to a halt.
Yep.
Remember, they had dumped garbage in the middle of the roads as well.
Yeah.
They didn't, it was a long period of time. Why were these issues just simply not addressed before all this?
Yes. Do you really want to deal with the consequences of protest? Do you want to deal with that as a government? Because guess what? At the end of the day, these deaths that we're talking about, these injuries,
on your
people
head.
are on your head, on you as a government, on you as an MCA, on you as an MP. Do you want to deal with the aftermath
As
of
a
that?
DG of Kura.
You don't want to deal with, exactly, you don't want to deal with that. You actually want to deal with, okay, we've done our job, applause. That's what you want to deal with.
Yeah. Constantly.
You know, this one, you don't even bring the ministry into it.
Oh, no. No.
There's a Director General of Kura. We start with you and then we go down.
Yeah.
Yes. This one, the president doesn't come into it.
No.
The minister doesn't
Even the
come
minister
into it.
doesn't come
Forget.
in here.
No, PS doesn't come into this one.
There's an acting Director General of Kura, and this is Engineer Silas Kinoti. And then, of course, we have the Director of Road Assets and Corridor Management, Engineer Mike Telieni. These people should be answering something.
They actually ought to.
And I think...
And I suspect that they would answer these things a lot quicker if that scholarship that the government provides for people who have not done what they're supposed to do, called arrests, were afforded. If they actually were being asked these questions when they were at the police station, I am certain that the responses would be a lot quicker. Yes.
We need to see people actually being taken to court. And this is the government itself being taken to court. Because, like you're saying, the economy of that area grounds to a halt.
Complete.
Local businesses should come together,
Yes.
including the matatus, and say,
This is what we've lost.
we've lost this much.
Because of you.
People should actually also come out and say, because of me having to walk this distance, this is the kind of loss that I've
You are aware that
suffered.
we are going to be told that we are fermenting insurrection.
Yes.
It's okay.
Go to court.
At this point, with the manner of things that we see, it's okay.
It's
Go
all right.
to court
It's okay.
and demand compensation for this, because somebody somewhere did not do their job.
And all those people
Even looking at
whose vehicles broke axles and
Yes.
those ones.
Cost of repairs as well.
Government.
Government, because the government should have done this. I have paid my taxes. We had a taxman yesterday. I've paid my taxes. The taxman has come and collected. He's done his job. That money has gone to the treasury. The treasury has done its job. allocated a budget and appropriated to Kura. Kura, you had one job to do. Make sure the road is motorable. It is not. So,
this is the thing. You're right, because I've talked to several people, and people are of the notion that you need to then go and beg your local legislator to do something for you in terms of a road, which is not the case. The things that a government is supposed to provide, or at least provide a conducive environment for certain things then to thrive, roads and infrastructure are one of those. Roads and infrastructure, education, health services,
and security,
water and sewage services, water and sanitation, and security. This is their mandate. Anything else apart from that, then you can start to say, okay, maybe they can help us here and there, but no. And also the other thing then is food security and sustainability. That is what they are supposed to do. So it's not
basic.
about this one. No begging, no enter this story. It is what they are supposed to do. So come down ham on them, absolutely, because this is your job. It's like you come into the studio every day. This is what you're supposed to be doing. This is your job description. Now, if you're not fulfilling, if you're not filling in those empty cans, then there's something wrong. And for time and time again, we've been pussyfooting around the issue and saying, okay, maybe. No, not maybe.
There's no maybe.
It is like this. This is the way it's supposed to be. We don't have to end in death. We don't have to end in some of the things that we've seen. Can you imagine? You're supposed to do your job, and because you don't do your job, someone dies. That's how simple it is. That's how simple it is.
The residents of Syokimau as well. So you've put together money to build a road, and this is money that should have gone into something else of yours, and yet you're still paying taxes. Go to court. Demand that the government actually pays you back with interest for that road. Say the people of Kitengela who are doing their own sewer system.
40 million shillings.
Their own sewer system.
Raise their own money.
Take these matters to court. It's about time that we actually held these officers accountable. They hide under the guise of, there's a politician who's going to take the heat. So we always talk about, why is the governor not doing this? Why is the MCA not doing this? Why is the MP not doing this? The MP is not the one who's supposed to be repairing that road. There's somebody in government who is receiving your taxpayers' money to actually do this job. They should be held to account at a very serious level.
CT talks about
whether
the
they're
fact
going to be
that you pay.
surcharged personally, it doesn't matter.
CT talks about the fact that we pay taxes over and over and over and over again without even realizing how much in taxes that we do pay. When you buy fuel, you're paying a tax. When you buy food, you're paying a tax. And interestingly, I think within that fuel that you pay, there's a levy that actually goes towards road, supposedly, goes towards...
Levy. That fuel levy is actually intended
for road maintenance.
Road maintenance.
In this country. So, I think also one thing that's kind of glaringly important now is that even us, as we pay, some of these things we should be able to know, because the person who doesn't do their job knows what it is that this money is supposed to be allocated for. The fear for them comes in when you, who they're supposed to be providing for, also know. So when you come armed with knowledge to be able to say, guess what, folks, we actually know what this money is for. We know what you're supposed to be doing with it. Trust me, they will get in line. But a lot of times we come from the premise of ignorance. So there's nothing to hold somebody accountable for, because we don't know really what it is that they're supposed to be doing. So understanding the basics of what your local legislator is supposed to provide for you, food, security, and sustainable food for that matter, security, water and sanitation, roads and infrastructure, and education, supposed to happen by your government. It should.
By the way, it's not that people don't know. Remember, our people are very slow to get to the point where they're protesting, as you see now. It's not a knee-jerk reaction that this happened and tomorrow they're protesting. No. By the time they're protesting, believe me,
water don't pass Gary, as we say.
Exactly. They've had it to their gills with this issue. And they've figured, no. As we say in Kiswahili, come and buy. Exactly. Now, that is not a state you want your citizenry to be in. No, not really.
At 7:45, let's open the phone lines now. 0719-012-600. I'd like to hear, what do you think about the state of road repair or disrepair in the urban areas of Kenya? Especially, let's start with Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, Eldoret. Those ones that have been called cities now. Let's talk about that. In Nairobi, for instance, we have seen 4 days of demonstrations at Kasarani Mwiki that now have seen a contractor being on the ground and 300 million shillings released, part of 1.7 billion shillings that's been earmarked for road maintenance and repairs. This money is already there. Somebody has just not done their job. Good morning.
Are you ready? Okay.
Spice FM. 96.1 Spice FM. Kisi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
So just to repeat, the stand is clear this morning. I'm saying that heads should roll at the government for the state of disrepair of roads, especially in Nairobi City. And those heads belong somewhere in the Kenya Urban Roads Authority. Or if not, then we should be told who. Secondly, people should be surcharged for the losses incurred by the citizens of these areas because of what has happened. So we've had 4 days of protest. Businesses were closed. Schools were closed. People had to walk long distances to access matatus from where they were able to access the matatus to go to work. That also came with losses. All those losses should be compiled. Somebody goes to court. Now, these groups of people from their resident associations go to court and demand compensation. Whether that compensation will be paid by the government or by the individuals, that's not my problem.
Not your problem, but it just needs to be done.
Yeah, people need to be compensated for the losses incurred. The phone lines are open. 0719 012 600. That's 0719 012 600. Also post your comment on Facebook, Spice FM KE. We are live streaming there. Tag us on Twitter at Spice FM KE. Hashtag The Situation Room.
So, it's interesting that the mandate of Kura, as defined by the Kenya Roads Act 2007, get this, is the management, development, rehabilitation, and maintenance of national urban trunk roads. Okay, so even in the definition of what it is that they're supposed to be doing, it's right there in terms of what is supposed to happen.
Rehabilitate, manage, and maintain.
Manage, develop, rehabilitate, and maintain. Exactly. So it's my hope that this then, and the good thing about this is that it shines light then on other areas where this thing is not being done. And I think we need to go away from this. It's easy for us to bash and, say, but I think we need to go away from this, then highlighting it even further and saying, this is actually then what needs to be done moving forward so that we don't have a situation like this in the future. But at the same time, I'm saying, look, man, if need be, absolutely. If dialogue has failed, if the methods that you have used previously to get someone's attention, and in whatever area, of course, void of violence, it is necessary for us to employ mechanisms that get people's attention. It's necessary because the way we see things going, a beg doesn't work anymore. It doesn't.
When you're talking about the people and their knowledge, there's also the other side of it, all right? So, for example, there are comments that have come in from areas where they say, in areas like Kawangware, for instance, the notion is that when the road is repaired, the cost of living will go up, the cost of housing will also go up. So they just decide to keep quiet. If this road is repaired, our rent will go up because now it becomes a more accessible place. Now, because of the state of the roads, the rent stays low. So they're like, okay, so...
But on the same road, but on the same road, we are looking at things like then you who has an opportunity, for example, getting produce from farm to market, for example, then you're able to do that at a more efficient and with more expediency. Then you're able to go several times a day. You who drives a matatu, then you're able to ply that route more times in a day. You can imagine now working on a dilapidated road, you can only go so many trips in a day. The road is working and it's in good condition. Maybe you can ply that route twice the number of times and put more money in your pocket. So even if the cost of your rent goes up, you still have more money in your pocket to facilitate that rise. Do you see? So there's no way it can be a bad thing.
Activity.
Absolutely.
Infrastructure, according to economists,
spurs development.
That's what it's supposed to
Yes, it is.
Yes, and it's been proven. It's not some empty statement that's being made to make people happy. It's actually true. If you have a good road network, the cost of transportation automatically will go down. The ease of transportation will go up. And the ease with which you can therefore reach markets, etc., all
improves.
That ad infinitum. But remember, when you're talking about protests, you perhaps need to give it a perspective here. Iran comes to mind. And when you look at what's happening in Iran, a certain turn of events with just the revelation that the Ukrainian plane that was shot down was actually mistakenly shot down by Iranian military. That. So the protests turned. Hey, man, it was a turn, all right. Seemed to have turned, or maybe it's the reporting that has turned, from the protests against the killing or the bomb, the killing of Soleimani, to now the issue of this. One, many Iranians died also in that flight. But what, again, people may not know, Iranians have a history of actually airing out their grievances by way of protests. Prior to the Ayatollahs taking sort of like control of this particular country, they had an emperor. It was called Shah. The Shah, that was the title. Raza Pahlavi was his name, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It began with protests. They were protesting about, they didn't like the way things were, cost of things. And the truly odd thing, if you were looking at the so-called developmental record of that particular country and this Shah, and how the standards of living were considered in this country at that time, they were considered to be very high. Nonetheless, people protested, out he went. In came Ayatollah Khomeini. Well, he also suffered the same fate not too long after.
Right. The same thing happened in Egypt.
Yes.
When there was the rising and said, look, we want to get rid of this one because of the one that came in and replaced that one could have been seen as considerably worse than that one. But they, again, still went to the streets and made their voices heard.
And if you look at what the trigger was in each of those cases, it's very interesting. The latest one prior to all this, women actually took center stage in this particular matter. In Egypt, it started over the cost of bread. I mean, these stories can go on, but they only symbolize one thing. These people were fed up, and all they required was one little thing.
Trigger.
Just like a trigger.
That's it. And the problem with this is, if the people in that Kasarani area are complaining about the roads, there will be other Kenyans who are complaining about something else.
Oh, yes.
Now, this is where the problem arises. And there'll be other Kenyans complaining about something else and say, wait a moment. These guys got their road repaired
Even
by
as let us-
protesting. We've understood. This Serikali, this is how they
This is
understand.
This is
how
how
we
they
handle
react.
understand.
They understand this
Exactly.
thing. That if we're not making noise, chances of them doing anything.
Our union
is not
leader
gonna
told
happen.
us that this is
Clearly.
the only language that
These
the
people
government
understand.
understands. We have to protest. Yes, we understand. We are doctors. We are supposed to be taking care of our
We
patients.
understand all
We
this.
understand all these things. But for the government to hear what we are talking about,
This is the route.
we have got to take this route. Why must the government always be encouraging people? Because this is encouraging people to actually take this route.
And even
Why?
when they come up with a solution, usually it's short term. It's just it just pours a little water on the fire,
Yep.
but there's still flames. And not very many months down the line, you'll find the same thing has reared its head again.
It comes back.
And it'll mushroom, maybe in another area, but it'll mushroom all the same.
This particular one of Mwiki, I have, excuse my pessimism, but I don't see this road, whatever is going to be done here, lasting until beyond 2022. You'll see them complaining again in a few years' time, complaining about the same thing. We've talked about the traffic area situation, for example, in areas of industrial area, Lunga. Some contractor has been on that road forever.
For years.
For years.
I mean,
Same thing, doing all the ring roads in Nairobi. I think one contractor, and you wonder, and there are government officers who actually allow somebody to work on a road for over 10 years. 10 years.
do you realize that Ngong Road has
Working on a road.
Ngong Road, irregardless of the fact that it is a collaboration between the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Kenya government, has
Start again. Gong Road, but Japanese actually.
there's one part that's being done by the Japanese. There's
then
another
there's a
part
section
that's
that
being
has
done by
some
the
Chinese.
Chinese.
I brought in the Japanese so that you can clarify.
You can hear.
Yes, it's not the entire road.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Carry on.
Sections of it. Sections.
Thank
Japan,
you.
section,
China,
China, Kenya in the middle. 15 years. Interestingly enough, since 2004. And hopefully this year, 2020, it will be completed. Again, asking yourself the question, why then do these things take so long?
Something that I've followed is the Japanese end of it. And what I've noticed is that if you notice, every time they finish a section, they inaugurate it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not every time they finish a section, they inaugurate it. So you actually get to see the progress.
You can see-
progress.
you
Yes,
can
it's
feel
not
the
as
progress.
those
They're very clever, these fellows.
You get to this point, they inaugurate it. Tell you,
Clap for us.
yes, we've done this again. We go back to this, then they move
We
again.
continue.
Yes.
So
So
I'm sure if you went back and see those 15 years, a bulk number of those years is between the ministry here, the government, doing something that you should have done, allocation of, where are people going to pass, what are we going to do. The paperwork is what took the bulk of the years. From the moment the contractors mobilized on the ground, you've seen movement. Moving. We have cases that I'm talking about, those ring roads where over 10 years, the contractor is on the ground. Apparently, the contractor is seen today. Wednesday, they are not seen until the next week on Tuesday.
Which is what we
They
see
work for
happening
3
in the
hours.
Lunga area right now.
People should go to court. That's what I'm saying this morning. People should go to court and demand compensation. Matatu operators have suffered losses. There are people who drive along that road. People have had to repair their vehicles because their road was immotorable, right? So you have a roadworthy car for an uncarworthy road, right? What you should do, go to court. Our courts listen to people. Tell the courts that, you know what, this government was supposed to have done something. Money has been allocated. Money is in the budget. All the procedures have, gone through. But the person who's responsible for this, the institution that should have ensured that I don't get to this position, failed. And I need to be compensated for that. Until we get to that point where people start feeling the pinch directly. Now, it's not about, saying, the government, in Serikali, things take long in government. No, it should not be like that. This conversation continues on our social media platforms. Spice FM KE, Facebook. Spice FM KE, Twitter. And you can also tag us individually at CT Muga, at Ndu Oko, at Eric Latif. And of course, the hashtag is The Situation Room. You can also join the live stream on YouTube, Spice FM KE. We live stream as well on our website, www.spicefm.co.ke. This being the first and only radio station in the region that broadcasts both audio and visual. You join the studio and you'll see exactly what you're talking about. Good morning. This is now coming up to 8 o'clock. We'll take a look at what's happening on the roads that we've been discussing. And then we shift gears a little bit and talk about something new. Good morning.
Sugar and spice and everything nice. Spice FM.
Spice up your life. 102.5 Spice FM. Kisumu.
Right, there's Wahala on Juja Road this morning. It is absolute parking lot. Nobody is moving. And we have, I think it's supposed to be 2 lanes, but they've made it into 3 this morning. So nobody's moving, unfortunately. I had said it's Friday, but that of course doesn't give for bad behavior, people. Mombasa Road is jam-packed all the way from Syokimau towards town. So many man-hours wasted on the road this morning. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to move out of there. Thika Road, yes, it's giving us problems because everybody's feeding in from Kiambu Road, getting to Allsops and then trying to divert to Muthaiga is not happening. Blocked on Market Junction since 7 o'clock this morning. It ain't happening. Bagadi Way towards Kenyatta Hospital, a bit slow, slight traffic, but it's moving. Of course, coming off from what is traffic from Langata Road as well as the Timor roundabout. Lunga Road, we talked about that. We have a mess today. Of course, the construction continues there. Coming off Wayaki Road, also not happening. Understand there's a major jam on Jogo Road, and that's because we see that border operators have decided they're going to block the road because one of their own has been hit. Approach with caution, folks. Take it easy. Spice FM KE, let us know what you see, and we'll share. 0719-012-600. Give us a call so we know where you are, where you might be stuck, and see how you can get out.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have CT Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latin, agent provocateur, the man in the chair, seasoned journalist, news hound, a man who believes in punching up, not down. This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Good morning in Mombasa, 87.9. How you doing? Welcome. 102.5 in Kisumu, 96.0 in Nakuru, 96.7 in Eldoret, 90.9 in Nyeri, 97.7 in Malindi. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. At 9 to 10, we'll have a guest on the hot seat this morning. We'll be discussing about church. The Kenyan church is in crisis, or is it not? We'll be joined by the Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adoloa, who's the Executive Director of Hatua Trust. She is a Reverend. She'll be coming to so that we can have that conversation. But for now, let's talk about terrorism, shall we, CT?
The face of terrorism in Kenya is best exemplified by not one event, but two. First, there was the bombing of the U.S. Embassy. And then there was the bombing of the Westgate Mall. Now, there have been other cases that we've had which we call and we label terrorism. And it's, well, acts that the world over have been seen as a characterization not just of dissent or an opposition to a certain ideology, but to the making of a statement by people who feel that in one way or the other they've been wronged. Now, terrorism is actually as old as time itself. This may not be clear, but actually it is. Those who read the Bible and believe in it may have come across somebody by the name of Judas Iscariot. Now, this particular gentleman, if you remember, was called the Zealot. Why was he called this? Actually, he was actually somebody who fomented revolt, and he had a small little terrorist group that used to terrorize people who were seen to collaborate with the Romans. If we fast forward it into modern times, groups that were officially known as the Irish Republican Brotherhood were known to have terrorized people through bombings, mostly bombings, killings, shootings, but it's because they felt that they wanted an independent Ireland. And the list goes on. In that same era of time, we had groups like the Shining Path, the Red Brigade. All these groups were labeled terror. Now, the one thing that scholars and people who have studied terrorism have never been able to come to an agreement on is the definition of terrorism. There is no unifying definition of terrorism, but there's one common thread. It usually targets non-combatants, people who are called civilians, innocent civilians, people who are not at war, people who did not quarrel with anyone. And then a new term emerged with reference to this, collateral damage, where people die as a result of a group of people being targeted, their leader being targeted, and someone or some people who just by some misfortune happen to be in that particular vicinity also suffer the consequences that arise from these particular actions. But what then can you say are the causes of this? Because everything I'm discussing is a consequence, the manifestation of it that becomes obvious. Because these aren't just groups of people. It starts with individuals who are convinced that this is the way in which they can get whatever wrong they feel to be protesting against actually sorted out. It ranges from marginalization to poverty to political disagreements, again, and the list goes on. Kenya has in the recent past faced a barrage of what we could rightfully refer to as terrorism in one particular area, Garissa. But it doesn't mean this is the only area in which it's been attempted. It's something that has arisen from the many reasons that we will discuss as we go on with the program, but the truth is this. Terrorism in Kenya actually is a problem, and it's not a continuous problem, it's actually a growing problem. And whatever it is that we've done to address it, I think a little more needs to be done. And the citizenry need to be informed a little bit more about it, not just about the consequences or what we see or what is manifested, but why it seems to be a growing problem. What is it that is providing fertilizer to this particular problem?
In this particular one, are you referring to the Al-Shabaab?
I am referring...
Al-Shabaab sponsored terrorism.
I'm referring to not just Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is what we read about in the media more often. But if you look at, say, if you want to say, take a broad look at what I would call the anatomy of terrorism, Al-Shabaab are the ones who we see there, as the phrase goes, they are in our face. But when you have a situation where groups of young people attack innocent citizens, those are acts of terrorism. whatever the reason. Sometimes it isn't even religious. These are just homegrown problems where people have decided that they are going to be criminal and that they are going to target civilians and they're going to cause terror. It actually does define them as terrorists.
So militia groups are terrorists.
They
Is that what
are
you're
by
saying?
definition terrorists because many of them target innocent people who are not at war with them. This is not even just collateral damage. These are people whom they find easy to target and therefore an easy group of people to further whatever interest they have. Why don't I move from Kenya and move right across to the country of Uganda? For the longest time, they've had a group of people acting from the northern part of Uganda. And what you associated this particular group with, or you have continued to associate them with, is abducting young women, killing people, atrocities that sometimes one argues could even be unmentionable. And they've done this for the longest possible time. They started off with, they began as a religion-inspired group. And then they just went, and then the liberation group. And then they just became a terror group.
They became a resistance army.
They called themselves a resistance army. They always call themselves as fancy names. But if you judge them by their activities, they are a terrorist group. People who get themselves together into a militia and all the activities seems to be aimed at attacking individuals who are not at war. Just people who are just going about their normal business. They are terrorizing these people. So by definition, they are terrorists. The examples can be given in the western part of this continent. You can talk about Boko Haram and you can talk about other groups. The groups we talk of are the ones who've gained most media attention. But doesn't mean they're the only ones who exist.
I think those that fight for ideological reasons, like now you've said the LRA, the Boko Haram, the Al-Shabaab, those ones, yes, you can call them terrorists. But I'm still stuck at that point where you're saying some small band of youth coming together and running amok in a village, we ban those as terrorists. They're not fighting for anything. They're just being truants.
Actually, you don't need to have an ideological background or an ideological motive to be a terrorist. No, you don't.
By virtue of the fact that you are instilling some kind of fear in people by your activities, that's enough for you to have said, because ist just means that you're causing that thing.
As a
you're
group.
causing terror as a group. Look at what people complained about Mungiki in Kenya for the longest
Yes.
time. They couldn't operate their businesses in peace. They were actually very afraid. And when they saw that there was any semblance of, Mungiki activity, they would hand over whatever shillings were asked of them. Or they were afraid that, look, if we didn't, they would be lynched. And so when you cause such kind of terror
Those are
amongst
terrorists?
people, I
Those
would
are
say
criminal
so.
elements.
But
Actually,
even at the wider
Of
terrorism,
course,
those are
terrorists
criminal elements as
Eric
well.
is
To a lower
right.
extent, because I'm saying the Chinkoros and the others, those are
They're
not
terrorists. They are terrorists. You see, there's
MRC.
There's terrorism that whose purpose is criminal. It doesn't make them lesser terrorists. They are terrorists
because
because
they're terrorizing people.
they are terrorizing people. They're killing people. They've banded themselves into a law unto themselves. If you don't see them as terrorists, what do you see them as? Criminals?
Yes.
But they are not. People who steal quietly, just come into your house
Are still
and put you
thieves.
to sleep. They're thieves. They're not terrorists. They're just thieves. But someone or people whose actions involve people being killed, creating insecurity where people are not sure whether they should walk after 6 o'clock, or now those are terrorists because they are spreading terror. They're spreading terror, and that seems to be the tool that they use to achieve their ends.
I may be both of us to continue the conversation, but for now I'm not. But let's continue the conversation. So the thing that you have said is, unless we address the root causes of this, then we are not going to fight better.
No,
and unless the citizenry are given more information.
Yes, because sometimes there are things that may be out of custom or habit of tradition that you are involved in, but you do not know that the consequences of these things may actually lead to the very thing that we're discussing. I will give a case in point.
Yeah.
When the state of Israel was created, some people were dispossessed, the Palestinians. It's just a fact of history.
Yeah.
So the Israelis were then seen as imperialists. Whatever disagreement we see playing out now is as a result of that. Whatever it is that we see. Now, look at how it is the Middle East has been branded and has been characterized by what we call a fermenting, should we say, arena for terrorists. And what they did begin with? People who felt they were dispossessed. That was the problem.
That was the beginning.
That was
Genesis.
the problem, yes. The terrorism that followed, they felt this was probably the only way they could fight this injustice. Now, that was a consequence, but the problem had begun much earlier. And then there's the second level where you talk about nations that help. This isn't a budding enterprise, a full-blown enterprise, but the people who give it wings. Many countries have been mentioned at different times. Pakistan has been mentioned. Iran in the latest has been mentioned the most. All sorts of Afghanistan have been mentioned. Unfortunately, the mentioning is always of other countries other than the countries that they fight. And yet, if you go back to the problem, you'll find that the people they target had a hand in these issues that later became full-blown. Yes, they had a hand in it. You cannot say that they are the only people who had a hand, but they did. I mentioned a group called the Shining Path. They were in Lima, Peru. They branded themselves as ideological, and their mantra and the narrative was communist. They were fighting capitalism. Why? The leaders they had at that particular time represented the worst possible case scenario for capitalism that you could think of, and repression. So this was their fight, and they went one ideologically, communism, but they were terrorists. If you look at think of any terrorist group in the world, they will tell you they have some ideology, or they will talk about some ideology. But if you pause for a while and ask, there will be some form of injustice that they have perceived that they are reacting to.
Right.
And since they do not have the means to actually mount a full-scale war on you, it's guerrilla warfare, which also equals terrorism. And that's what you see happening. And usually they're not large. The moment you use pockets, it can't be large. Okay? Groups of people believe in this thing, and they believe this is the way they should go. Many of them who've succeeded have gotten other people to understand their way of thinking, and they have grown. At some point, you could even have referred to certain presidents we have in East Africa as terrorists, simply because they were providing a little discomfort to those who are in power. But once they become the president, you are now a liberator. There's a fundamental difference here.
There's a change that takes
But
place.
if you look at what they were doing and why they were doing it, there was something they were fighting against. There's something they didn't like.
They had justification for it.
They did have justification.
There was a reason why they were doing it.
There was a reason. If you may not agree with the reason, you may not like the reason, but they have a reason.
Reason you may even look at and see there's justification, but then how they bring
Go
it out,
about
how
it.
they go about
Yes,
it,
yes.
addressing it, is where
Yes.
the problem comes in.
Precisely.
Their choice of action and routes of action.
But even if you do have something that is founded as a reason as to why you may be agitating for something, then when you bring in the elements of then putting other people through the ringers, then I think then it's not necessary. Because ask yourself then, with the application of terror to people, doing certain things to them, does it then mean that the ideologies that you then fight for then will be established? Not necessarily, but it just makes you a thorn in the side of the government of the day, as it were. It makes you a thorn in the flesh of the people who say, okay, well, if we don't do this, this is the trouble that is going to get us in for fear of being bombed or buried, then we might want to comply. But in terms of now making sure that that thing which they fight for is actually established, I don't know how far it actually goes.
Listen, one of the things that they do, again, is they use religion has been a very useful tool in spreading any of these ideologies that bring these people together. But one valid question, and when you also talk about a valid question, you must understand there are just certain basic selfish human interests. Not all of these groups, they may espouse and they may talk loudly about ideologies, but you may find the ideologies of an individual or his buddies or the group
Or the larger group doesn't even understand what
they're told is what makes sense and what will enable them to do what they're supposed to do. But the agenda that these other people have is completely different.
Completely, totally different.
Yes. They could just be businessmen who have realized that this is a good economic tool to use.
Yes.
Sabotage, bomb a few, what do they call it?
Installations.
Yes, bomb a few plants, bomb some pipelines. Yes. That is
To make noise, to have an impact.
It's economic sabotage, but it gets the point across.
across.
Yes.
Yeah, it gets the point across. But then now, if you look at the way in which they operate, then still to say that the terror that they bring on people, the things that they continually agitate for, if looking around, have we seen that these things have been established around the world with their activities? Regardless of where we want to look at them. I look at Boko Haram in Nigeria. Have people then been able to say, because of what they've been able to do over time, that we now accept this as a way it's going to be? We accept these ideologies because we don't want our people to continue suffering. It doesn't seem to me to work. If we look at what happened with Al-Shabaab, or what continues to happen with the larger terrorist groups and cells when when 9/11 happened, if anything, it put fire under the war against terrorism,
Yes,
the war against
reason
terror.
is because people
it came
died.
back even hotter,
People died.
As
If
opposed
they
to
had-
accepting
if they had
what
bombed
the terrorists-
some oil installation, nobody died. It would have been economic sabotage. Somebody,
But it doesn't get the
no,
mileage.
believe me. When people die, that's where it changes.
And that's what they're seeking, actually, even the terror organizations. They're seeking that. High impact, high visibility. When we see Al-Shabaab coming to bomb us here, coming to
Terrorize
terrorize us here in Kenya, they're looking for high impact. When when there are those that they're fighting, they go and kill some police officers, they kill teachers, they're looking at
Kill
impact.
students, remember,
Kill
students.
They're looking at impact. But looking at that, it doesn't really matter their justification. But you're saying, let's look at our country and how we are dealing and how we are handling terrorism.
Yes.
Just the other day, Interior Secretary Fred Matiang'i was speaking to the leadership, the top security organs, especially at the coast, and he was saying, let's look at Lamu. And Lamu, one of the issues that we're having is that the terrorists have actually recruited people from among the resident communities. And those resident communities are, for lack of a better word, shielding the terrorists. So when you go to try to flush out the terrorists, you don't know, because you're going to a village. Everybody looks normal until at some point when they're activated, they now become abnormal, so to speak. How do we deal with that? There's radicalization, which has, there have been very many programs addressing radicalization, youth radicalization in Kenya, across the country. Looking at the northeastern parts, especially at the coast, very many programs that are addressing radicalization, trying to address why is it that these youth are so vulnerable to somebody coming to tell them this is the best way out for you, and seeing how can we combat that.
It's
The
not.
government has done quite a bit.
It's not an old narrative. Huh? If you ask yourself, why is it that most human bombs, why is it that for the longest time the A came from the Middle East, and specifically one particular area, Palestine or Lebanon? Why? If you look at the history of those countries and what they were and what they are, and what amounts in their minds to have been interference by their way of life, it provided the most fertile ground you could find for someone to be radicalized. They were dispossessed. They felt marginalized. What they had considered their own heritage no longer existed. So you remove the element of hope. This person comes in and replaces it and gives them a new hope. Through this, you can achieve that which you lost. Thought and discussion that, like the one we're having, isn't brought into that. You just feel, this pain that I have will go if I follow this path. And if you remember, they tend to choose young people.
Yes.
Why? By the virtue of their youth, they will tend to be more vulnerable.
Right.
And they'll tend to be more intense in their belief and more idealistic. So in terms of targeting a group that you can easily influence, yes, well planned, well thought through. But to ask the second question, what would they be complaining about? One of the things that the coast has complained about, with coastal people, is one, they've complained of marginalization, they've complained of their land being taken from them, and they've complained about being starved of development projects. Now, once the county governments came in, that particular argument could be thwarted, because it is now Maendeleo Mashinani.
Yeah.
It's been brought to you.
It's here with you.
And you've chosen your leaders to bring this to you. So if you actually have a complaint, you really do know who you ought to address it to.
Exactly.
The problems we've had in the northern part of Kenya were for the same sort of reasons. These reasons are not different from any other place where you've had a group of people forming themselves, starting with dissent and then forming themselves into what we term as terror groups. They were unhappy about certain things, and they were unhappy for a long period of time. And the issues were not addressed. Or at least they felt they were not addressed adequately.
But And if I look at what the government has done over the number of years, like let's say in the last 10, 15 years. One of the things that emerged immediately after the increased terror attacks, especially after Westgate or just around that time of Westgate, was that we are having very many cells of disgruntled youth who are being recruited into joining us
And radicalized.
and being completely radicalized. We had actually had incidences where in the parts of northeastern, many youth had suddenly just disappeared from homes and villages, and it was found out that they had actually crossed over into Somalia. Many were crossing over into Somalia for economic prospects, because these fighters, those days, the Islamic Courts Union, were actually paying these people, come in, join the Islamic Courts Union, you'll be paid to be a soldier. So it was for economic reasons. But then during that time also, in the process, they get radicalized. Some of them stay there. Some of them are now completely radicalized, that they're told you can go back and attack your home country, and they do not see anything wrong with that. When the government came in with the programs of trying to curb that, to fight that, you've seen a reduction in terms of the number of youth who are crossing over, the number of families that are complaining, you know what, my son or my daughter has disappeared. Although we still see elements of that, it has reduced. And now Al-Shabaab still tries to cross over into us. But, fertile ground, it has been made more acidic to be able to grow this kind of youth from us and taking them into Somalia. One, that has been done. Deployment of KDF into Somalia. Now, of course, there are those arguments that say, have they stayed too long? Have we overstayed our
welcome, as it were?
The question,
welcome.
should they have gone there in the first place? That
we
is
have-
the question that is asked.
Was
even
it
more often now.
justified? Was
Yes.
it justified to cross over into Somalia? Were we just crossing there because some tourists had been kidnapped and we used that as an excuse for the excursion? The military conducting business in Kismayo and other places. All those things could be asked, but the bottom line is the fact that we have soldiers on that side, it has also helped. I am one of those people who believe that yes, everything
helped
else,
what exactly?
it has helped to quell and reduce the number of incidences of terrorism, or
Odd-
even increased
oddly enough,
increased our intelligence capabilities.
there are those, the intelligence capability, yes, but one could argue that our presence in Somalia is what has
Was one of the
exposed us-
reasons why.
exposed us to even more attacks. There are those who could argue that way. I don't have all the facts on that particular issue, so I will leave it at that particular point. But ask yourself a simple question. When people complain about marginalization, what do they mean? And even if we understand what they mean,
Well,
do they have a point? Do they have a valid point?
Well, in terms of, I think a lot of times it comes with being far from the seat of power, as it were. And then, of course, now when it comes to distribution of resources, I think is a big thing, because resources are always a bone of contention with any kind of conflict, or when you see any kind of agitation for some kind of representation. Resources are usually at the heart of the matter. And of course, I think the different parts of, if you look at Coast, for example, didn't come into the limelight. When you thought Coast, you thought Mombasa. You didn't think Kwale, you didn't think Lamu, you didn't think Kilifi, you didn't think Malindi per se. Of course, devolution has helped with that, because then a lot of profiles of counties have been raised by virtue of the fact that devolution came into play. But this is the problem that you hear of a lot of times. They feel that because they're far off from the seat of power or far off from the center, that people tend to forget about them and kind of lump them up with the rest per se. I think that is one of the major points when they talk about we feel marginalized because of XYZ.
They also look at the degree of government involvement or the kind of projects that they get. We had Suleiman Shabal from Mombasa the other day here, and he was telling us, look, if you look at the number of years that we've been independent and how long it has taken, and we still have never upgraded this section of the road from the airport to entering to the CBD, or from the CBD going all the way to the border of Mombasa County with Kilifi County at Mtwapa.
Shimolatoa prison
Shimolatoa
to
prison
Likoni,
to
yes.
It
13
has
kilometers.
not been sorted for all these years.
56 years.
When you look back at that, and that's one of the reasons why you say, well, I think we are treated as lesser beings. Especially now when people compare, all right, so what these other roads that we've been seeing, we're seeing images of roads being expanded. The Thika superhighway has been done. The Nairobi now, in fact, they're even putting up an elevated highway. And we look
If
at
someone
us
takes that information and gives it a nice spin,
proper,
it is
And then-
fodder for radicalization like
and
nothing
then,
else
then
you
brings
want.
in some element of religion into it.
That's done. Done. You know why? They can actually see it.
They can relate.
Yes, and there are facts that you can say, like other places, forget the reasons behind it. They will tell you, fact, 56 years down the status quo.
Right.
And they will experience those traffic jams which go into, not early evening, into the night.
Into the night.
In the course of the week. Why? And all that has been required was the road to be expanded because
Only.
that's it.
They will not, of course, be aware of what happens in Kasarani Mwiki.
No.
The people of Kasarani in Nairobi also don't have roads. Or the people of Eastlands spend so many hours before they get to Komarok. That they don't know.
No.
What they know is what relates to them. And this road has never been. Have you ever seen the government since you were born? Have you ever seen this?
And then it also spills over to something that must be mentioned here, leadership issue. Why I say leadership is this. I look at what Sakaja has done.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, a benchmark from which to understand. Senator of the says, no. I am the senator. I don't know what conversation he had in his head before this was actualized, but it is clear something is now being done.
Yes.
All right? The coast has had leaders for the longest time. And I feel we can blame the central government squarely, but we must also blame the leaders
The
that
local
they've had.
leadership.
Because what can they say they have done to push certain agendas, and what can they say has not been achieved through their pushing?
Have we had senior leaders from the region in government? Of course, yes. Every successive government has had a senior leader from the coast region. Not one, actually. More than one. Many of them who have, cut their teeth in national politics from this region. And yet, you see, what have they done?
And yet, if you were to look again, I love history because it gives you perspective. If you look at leadership, even at the coast, there's one particular gentleman who comes to mind. It's called Tuva. Tuva is a man who I think went to school with President Kibaki. MP for Malindi, even became an assistant minister. Two things that he did, which were that man was way ahead of its time when it came to these things. He had a cooperative that had a major shareholding in a hotel in Malindi. He also ensured that the Kilifi cashew nut factory, which later became a parastatal, ensured that, cashew nuts were grown at the coast. So here's a crop which had a market, but you had people working in it and growing. He took it further. He even had a transport company. Similar Sako, locals. Now, think, you're talking about, not 90s, you're talking about 70s going to 80s. Local Sakos owning shares in a beach hotel with tourists. Now, was that not a man who really thought ahead?
It's forward thinking and development minded.
Leadership, you see. Now, he saw this was an opportunity. This is our place. We can do this from among our people, and it was done. Now, unfortunately, since that time, there have been gaps. Huge gaps.
Quite a number.
Huge gaps. Yes.
It's about leadership of the people. It's also about how you ensure that your people are benefiting from the cake, so to speak.
Yes.
Now, City Muga is raising the issue of terrorism in the country especially and saying, looking at the recent incidences of terrorism where we have increased attacks or we have renewed attacks from terror organizations on several fronts, it's about time that the government re-engineered more concerted efforts in addressing this and especially more awareness to the public. Let the public be more aware of what's happening so that the public can participate more. When we come back out of this short break, we'll actually now go into the nitty-gritty and we'll ask City to be more prescriptive. What exactly would you like to see the government doing? Let's discuss that. Good morning. It's 8:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation.
The 80s have never sounded so good.
My favorite songs of the 1980s.
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi. Traffic.
Right, so Bagadiwe has been terrible this week. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that spill over from Langata Road and join us, trying at least to get to the City Mortuary roundabout. But the bone of contention this morning seems to be Mombasa Road, all the way from Lolongo, stretching down towards General Motors, and even way after that. It is traffic. We don't know why, but it seems all the vehicles are on the road this morning. Not been able to see an incident or an accident as to why this is the situation. But folks, unfortunately, we're just going to have to sit tight. route. As you get past Airtel this morning, then you will be able to have a smoother way out. But for now, it is bumper to bumper, and that is what we're going to have to contend with right now. Kangundo Road off Saika Estates is flowing quite smoothly as far as traffic is concerned. Ngong Road, of course, is a little bit of traffic getting us to the city mortuary roundabout. All right, Langata Road traffic, you just take your time, unfortunately, because it's not moving. All right, apart from the mad jam on Mombasa Road and that which is comparing greatly with the Thika Road, everything else seems to be moving smoothly. If you find an alternate route, do let us know. We can spread the word. Spice FMKE, or call us on 0719 012 600.
96.1 Spice FM. Kisi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
All right, CT, you've laid the ground, you've given us perspective, given us even historical background to this. Now, you're talking about the government doing more to fight and curb incidences of terrorism and providing more information to the public.
The more that I speak of isn't in the realm of what the government would do, for instance, to counter terrorism. These sort of activities fall under, I think, the ambit of things that the government cannot openly talk about. There are things that the government does, there are things that they will be able to tell us, and the things that actually, for purpose of security, they cannot talk about in the public. What I was actually referring to was something that you'll hear me saying over and over again. It's getting people to be armed mentally about this. That's one. Let me explain what I mean. When you heard of terror gangs in the area of Kisauni and beyond, Mwakirunge and beyond, attacking people, it didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice. It means these groups exist. In any community, people know the criminals. They may not talk about them because these criminals have families. They don't sort of like come from another planet, visitors, and then return. They're people we live with.
Yeah.
Someone cannot attempt to rob you until they know there's something worth robbing. So again, they have knowledge. That knowledge comes from their proximity with you. When people understand the need to, A, report such people, right ahead of time, say, so and so is a criminal, this and this, you then begin a process where people can actually ensure that the criminal elements in the society are weeded out. But instead, what do we have? They are shielded.
They're shielded.
Parents know their children are criminal. How? Your child doesn't work, and yet they can afford a car. Your child doesn't work, and I'm talking about both men and women, boys and girls, doesn't work, but always has money to buy fancy clothes.
This is true.
You don't ask, where on earth do you get these things? You are encouraging it. Your child disappears mostly at night. They're asleep the whole day. And when you talk to them, they don't seem to be in their right state of mind. You don't ask, is my child on drugs? Because a lot of these activities are also enhanced by the usage of drugs. When they're called mind-altering substances, it's for a reason. It means your thinking doesn't have the clarity that it normally ought to have. Again, I know I may be sounding like I'm hitting on parents, but it has to begin there because people come from families. And many of the people who commit these crimes are young. So it stands to reason that many of them are still probably even living with their parents. We don't have a culture where we sort of like whistleblow on our own. Earlier on, we talked about the government having programs to sort of like de-escalate the radicalization. Well, how do we know? Families complained and said the children had disappeared. And if you talked to people in Mombasa, they will tell you, so-and-so's son, so-and-so's children, so-and-so, people whom we knew disappeared.
They disappeared.
Yes. But you see, what many people don't understand, that radicalization wasn't just at the coast. There are very many communities, whether from Meru, whether from Western Kenya, whether from the former Nyanza. Radicalization took place all over the landscape.
What you said actually points to the fact, and looking at Kenya, I think a lot of times when we had what was the flying squad before that, these are people who are aware of where these individuals lived and what they did and what kind of business they carried out. However, you'll find that in many cases, what was reported is that families or those in the area were afraid to whistleblow because they did not then want any kind of repercussions to prey on them. And and we've seen this with the mafia gangs and stories that we've seen, the mafia itself, gangs that we've seen in other countries. The thing is that people would be ready to give them up, but
You rats, you die.
of course, there you go. So people are afraid to then say that because they don't know what would happen to them in the future. So I think the element of fear plays both ways. The element of fear, it goes even deeper when it comes to then being able to do something about
To
it.
volunteer information.
To volunteer information means essentially that you could die.
Even as
You know?
parents, I'm sure they have the same things that you're talking about. I'm sure as a parent, every parent, because they know their children, they can see the differences. They can see what's happening to their child. They can see that my son or my daughter has, started
Changed.
going a different direction.
Yeah.
Now, how do you address that? There are very many things that also come in, City, in terms of the society and how we are as a community. You fear also appearing as a failed parent. So the first thing is, before you go out, you want to see if you can address it. Try and see if you can talk to your son. And of course, your son is no longer listening to you. Is at that point where
They've passed the threshold when they would listen.
Threshold
Yeah.
where you'd sit them down. So you're not talking to them. You maybe talk to one or two cousins and uncles and aunties to try and address it. It doesn't work. Before a parent goes to snitch on their son to the authorities, it'll take a lot of time. And you can understand. That's understandably so. You cannot just wake up today and go and say, you know what, I
suspect
think
my son or my daughter to be a terrorist.
My son is a terrorist, or my son is a thug. He's a thug. He's one of those armed robbers that attacked a certain bank the other day. You can see, well, they've come in with a lot of money. You can see they're operating with a lot of cash. You also know that there was a bank that was robbed, but you will not say it just because you are a parent, City. It's not because you are, you are irresponsible.
We take the view that if you want to do good by someone, that you agree with them or you do things that necessarily or seem to help them, like keeping quiet. And yet the opposite is actually true. Sometimes the best mtoto akilia wembe.
But yeah.
Yes. The understanding is that sometimes you need the world to teach this particular individual something. So you remove the protection that you would ordinarily have and say, okay, that's what you want to do. And usually it arises from a disagreement about what should be done, because the child wants to say, look, I don't think so because of this. But then say, okay, fine, carry on. Now,
last resort.
Yes, it is a last resort, and indeed that's the way as parents we would respond. I'm taking this discussion further and leaving the parents out of it for a while. In the 1800s, the gentleman by the name of Sir William Harcourt, he was the Home Secretary in the UK. He formed what would now later be known as a special branch.
Yes.
Why is it relevant to us? It's relevant to us because the police force of Kenya as we know it was inherited from the British. So a lot of the training that our people have gone through was under that same ambit and structure. Now, the one thing that people who are trained to gather information, one of the things they do is they infiltrate. They make sure that there are people who are ordinarily civilians, but who also work for the government in gaining information. It could be young, old, in a workplace, wherever. In what they call police states, or for instance, a place like, let's just give an example of a place like, say, Tanzania. Because of the Ujamaa setting, you'll be a group of people sitting and having a cup of tea. Among you, there'll be an individual whose job is to listen to
find out what you people
and
are
to
saying.
report immediately.
Absolutely.
It's a system that they have. Tanzania is not a police state, but because of the heritage of the Ujamaa, you enter Tanzania, they will know who you are.
Yes, and they will follow you.
Yes, you go to a place where you're going to, they will know what you're doing. The same will happen if you go to Rwanda. They will know. They will even ask you on your way back, so how was this lovely wedding that you attended?
Yeah.
You're wondering, how on earth did you know that I had come to attend a
I didn't tell
wedding?
you I was coming to attend a wedding. But it means these are people who are careful about the security of the country, and they're going about the business of ensuring that they have information. So.
But Siti, I got to ask you then, as I interject here, because if we look at the several cases of terror that have happened, look at most recently with what happened with Dusit in Nairobi. In a matter of days, I think even hours after this attack took place, we had Kenya police already being able to round out and then find out, trace back to off Thika Road, where this individual was here. He had a woman visitor on several occasions. They would do this, that, the other thing, and they were able to find out the information very, very quickly.
Yes.
So then, of course, that points it gives credence to the fact that yes, they're aware of what is going on.
Our
but
security
then,
forces are very well trained.
oh, I don't
Our
dispute that in any
intelligence
whatsoever. I
forces
think
are
very well trained.
Yes.
So then, the then notion that they would want to snuff such operations out or stamp that out once they have an inkling of knowledge or a little bit of a whiff of information about what is going on, then of course begs the question, then why don't they?
They do.
No. But most
Actually,
times we've seen
no,
action. Most times
correct.
we see action.
Seen.
Most times we've seen action after something like this has taken place. Of course, we've seen that there have been failed attempts, and we've seen that there are people who've been arrested because there was a suspicion that they could be involved in terrorist activities. But then we often find out that a story is told with much more color and vibrance after an event like this has happened, and somebody's actually, you know what? I tended to see that I saw on many occasions that.
Welcome to the club.
Voila, you guys have now infected me.
Friday.
Started with Eric
It's
Muga.
Friday.
Now you've brought it.
Yes, we have.
I reject it.
Yes.
So now then you see, okay, people are able to give more information after this, and they say, actually, yes, I saw this, or I saw this kind of tendency, I saw this kind of behavior. Now, if it's something that we're trying to root out, as something that has eaten away into society, or we have pockets of people, it almost seems like it's something that security forces want to use to their advantage by not weeding out at a certain point until something happened.
So that
As conspiratorial as that
yeah.
sounds.
Take it further. To what end?
Well, then it makes it show that you're doing a job,
There are things the government
remind
cannot
people that
tell
you're- that
everybody.
that you're actually relevant.
There are things the government cannot possibly make a public announcement about.
True.
Like they will not tell you, we stopped this number. They will not.
Or we know some.
They will
we are
not.
monitoring so and so.
because there is what you call the same things. Short-term issues, long-term, medium-term. There are things the government may be working on that they'll never tell us.
Of course, for security
Okay.
matters, that makes
There
sense.
may be serious attempts that they have foiled.
Thwarted,
Foiled,
but they will
yeah.
not tell you. Remember, for instance, if we were to go back to the UK and other such countries, they do have official, they do have acts that prevent information from actually being made public until a certain time has lapsed.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, now in the UK, you can get information about Mau Mau because that particular time has lapsed. So it's something you can actually find out about and find out details.
And in many cases, you'll actually find information is coming out, yes, but it's still redacted.
Of course it
There's
is.
some names that you'll not know. There's some details that will not be revealed.
Because the consequences of certain things will be known and they figure this we don't want to deal with right now.
Yep.
Not right now. Now, back to the question of what do you do? You see, there is intelligence and then there's something you call surveillance. Now, this one is tricky. It's very, very tricky. Surveillance is often made available to the police or to the services of the police as they see fit when the country is in imminent danger and something like a state of emergency has been declared. Then they are able to tap your phone, tap your this, look at the other. In the absence of that, your fundamental rights can be argued will have been interfered with. Tricky. The Patriot Act in the US was possible after
9/11.
Yes, that's when it was possible because it was clear. This is what has happened. This isn't good. You can't have such a thing happening again ever.
Yep.
Okay?
And there's been a serious pushback even on that, saying Big Brother is watching too much. Big Brother is accessing too much information. Is going contrary to my rights. It'll always be there.
Now that debate comes on, and please understand, it's against a backdrop of what is seen internationally as the increasing tempo of terrorism, not reducing, increasing tempo of terrorism, and also Quill.
Friday.
Hey.
Friday.
Tongue, please cooperate
It's
with the
all
brain.
Eric's fault. Let's just
And
agree.
also,
Yes. Also and also. Diversification and the manner and the metamorphosis of what we refer as terrorism. Because it used to be people shooting, bombing.
Yeah.
Now, it's gotten to something else. Misinformation. Remember that one?
Yep.
Yes. Big tool. And it just seems to it just seems to keep changing and
So at this point, so that CT's tongue can rest for a second,
It can connect to the brain.
it can connect to the brain. Let's take a break and we'll come back and continue the conversation. Let me open up the phone lines for 14 minutes. It's 14 to 9, 0719 012 600. Remember, in the next hour, 9 to 10, we'll be having a guest in the studio, and this guest is Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa. She's the Executive Director of Hatua Trust. And the question we're asking today is the Kenyan church in crisis. We have seen reports coming out showing that confidence in the church is waning in the country. Now, explain this. What is happening? Let's also look at the value and the role that the church plays in the governance of the country, and in terms of how people relate to their government, how the church helps us to keep track of what's happening. We also be talking about national ethos and the church's role in this. This is a situation room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. For now, we are still discussing terrorism. 0719 012 600.
96.1 Spice FM. Kisi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
No.
All
Well,
clear?
as we're saying,
Yes.
when you have a situation like the one we currently are in, and we refer to ourselves as being in the communication age, this very discussion we're having takes on a completely new dimension, because everything changes. The ability of people who are involved in what we're now terming as terrorist acts to communicate has changed. It is easier simply because of the age in which we live in. The means by which you can communicate and probably hide what it is that you intend to do. Everything, this landscape has changed completely. Because when you get to a point where even countries who have far better developed surveillance intelligence systems than ours have homegrown terrorism. For instance, if we go to the US, all right, one of the biggest problems they're having right now is not really somebody who's coming from some other country to terrorize them.
It's within. It's the folks within.
Supremacist groups within the country, white supremacist groups to be precise,
Yep.
they are causing terror on minority groups. And it begins with rhetoric, language, and what have you, and then it comes to full-fledged attacks. But again, remember, at the time prior to the 9/11, there was an Oklahoma bombing.
Yeah.
And the person who was behind that bombing was a local, homegrown.
Deep southerner.
Homegrown, when I say homegrown. So even when you talk of terrorism, you must distinguish between what you feel as an incursion on your sovereignty from other people and what happens with your people. Now, there was the religion that was involved in the Oklahoma bombing. It wasn't Islam. No. And Islam is given bad rap for this one here. It wasn't. It wasn't. This guy was a Christian. Right? He wasn't a nihilist. He wasn't somebody who was without faith. In fact, you could argue it is belief and it is faith that
Led him to behave in this manner.
precisely.
Right.
So if you're talking about religion, you must talk about it broadly and understand that it doesn't matter what religion it is, it can play a part in fomenting terrorism. Let's talk about homegrown terrorists. If somebody begins by simply robbing the occasional child from school of their sweets,
Take a break.
I need a moment.
Take a moment. Let's go to Nakuru. Sami is in Nakuru. Good morning, Sami.
Good morning.
How you
morning.
doing?
Yeah. I would like to raise my concern about terrorism.
Yeah.
thank you.
I think we should introduce patriotism right in school. That we should love our country first. Like the way everyone will sing the national anthem and all that stuff. Because if you look at like the Britons, the Americans, they love their country so much. But what happens to us in Kenya? That we all know who the killers are. We know who the Al-Shabaab are. They are within our society. But what happens to us? The don't care attitude. We don't love our country that much.
Is
Thank
it
you.
really a don't care attitude that makes people not report?
Or
Yeah.
more for fear.
Or lack of patriotism?
Lack of patriotism. Yes.
Okay.
Because even if we'll get the police forces and bring them more closer, like they be a brother to us. They do so much to us, but we have that fear reporting. Like I was talking to someone recently. No matter how petty crime is, we should make a report to the police so that they can have the statistics to look the way forward to handle the issue. But you find your car broken, you find nothing stolen, you say, I'm not going to report the same. It will happen to someone else. So it's the same thing because I'm not in Garissa, I'm not in Wajir, I'm in Nairobi.
So you
or
feel
in Nakuru.
you're far from the action.
I'm far away from the attack.
Okay.
We find so many sanctions coming up from like, be prepared, Nairobi is going to be attacked. But don't we have intelligence information in Garissa and in Wajir?
We do.
Yes, we have
do.
the police.
You're still there.
Yes, it's still there.
Thank you very much, Sammy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Frederick calling in from Mombasa. Good morning, Frederick.
Good morning to you, Eric. How are you?
Salama kabisa.
Yeah, I'm happy. Today I have a conversation. I want to contribute to the conversation.
Yes, go
Thank
ahead,
you.
sir.
Good morning, Frederick.
Okay, yeah. There is a problem. And the problem is the way our system has been with the government taking all the responsibility on matters security.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to the public trying to work together with the government, it is becoming strange because we used to know that this was a responsibility of the government. You go to the police station to report, and you're the first suspect on reporting an incident that needs to be done. So the issue of community policing does not arise.
Doesn't work.
People are seated, telling stories, taking some kahawa. A police van passes, a Land Rover, everyone
scatters
for nothing. And then you want to tell us to work with the police. It does not work.
Right.
So I think it boils up to the government owning up that there
don't
was
trust
always
them.
a civilian and a police here.
Thank you,
And
Frederick.
that line has never been rubbed. It's still there and it's getting bolder.
Right.
Thank you, Frederick. Abdi, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Also
morning.
calling in from Mombasa. What are your views on this?
I've got 2 or 3 things to contribute. One, it's about the leaders in Mombasa.
Yeah.
For real, and that is the truth, we've never had leaders in Mombasa. We've never had one. It's only God that will bless us one day, one time we've got to.
With a
we'll
leader.
get somebody with a leader that at least will think for us, not him.
Okay.
Because 90% of them think for themselves.
Right.
Okay, about the terrorism thing, it starts with us, but it's not us, it's the government, the police. You cannot go report nothing. I'm living in Kisauni. There is Wakali Kwanza, all these things. We know them.
Yeah.
We live with them. It's this child, this. But who will you go tell? You
police.
go tell the police. Tomorrow they go take that. They go bribe. The police tells them it's Abdi who told me. So after that, I have to leave that place.
Yeah, you become a target.
So, I'm not a target. Then I'll be killed the next minute. Yes. So where are the police? Where is this thing they go get from Kiganjo?
Who works for whom?
The patriotism.
And confidentiality. Thank you, Abdi.
Should start with the police.
Thank you, Abdi. Another caller from Mombasa. Solomon, good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Based on terrorism, I've lived in 2 places, one in Kiambu, one in Mombasa, and there's a policy that government introduced, the Nyumba Kumi initiative, that people walitarau kwa ubaya sana. It's not something that should be pushed maybe by the government to be implemented. Even ourselves should maybe try and make that happen. The reason I want to compare the two is one. Where I come from the village, 25 years ago when I was applying for my ID, I went to the assistant chief. The only thing in that form you fill, the only information that I fill is only my mother's ID.
Yeah.
Because he knows me, he knows where I live, he knows my siblings and everything.
Yeah.
If there's an issue regarding where I live, he communicates us to us. Now come to the urban setting, you don't even know your neighbor.
Yeah.
So you can live with a terrorist, a thug, or a criminal next to you, someone who will talk every day.
And you don't know.
And that is an initiative. Exactly. And that initiative, you're able to know who this person does what, does who, whatever. Have those meetings, and usually that initiative by the government should be implemented widely. And people should take as a personal thing. We have this Nyumba Kumi initiative with us. Because that's the only way we can able to not only terrorism, any other criminal elements. Because one thing is the people who are radicalized, they are people who we know, they are our friends.
They live in the
and
community.
They are our daughters and sons.
Right.
And they live within the community.
Thank you, Solomon.
And yes.
Asante sana. Well, he raises good points. Yeah, community policing is a way of actually also dealing with this. But even as a community, which is also what Abdi was saying, when you go to the police and the issue of confidentiality with the information that you give to the police is not taken seriously, then what?
You know, the Chiefs Act that gave the chiefs the powers that they had prior to the devolution and the changing of the constitution, the enactment of this new constitution, there are many issues which would actually be solved at that chief's level and solved fairly effectively. Because again, it worked with what he called the Nyumba Kumi, because the village elders. So people met frequently, they talked frequently. So you actually knew who the thief was. There was a gentleman in this country, it was in Nairobi to be precise, called Shaw.
Patrick.
For the longest time. Now, he was credited with actually weeding out criminal elements in the Eastlands areas for the longest time possible. And it is said, whether this is in the realm of mythology, but it is said that he would actually go to the parents of the thug and tell them, you know, your son is XYZ. My advice is either they ship out, move away from here, or at some point they will go to meet their maker.
If he does not move out of here in the next 2 days,
We'll deal with him.
I meet with him,
Dead.
I'll take him out.
I'll take him out.
It's as simple as
Essentially.
that. Now, whether this is true or not, but it tells you that there was an intelligence service which not only worked, but which responded to issues. Because if it exists and it doesn't respond, then it isn't very useful, is it?
Yeah.
But then there was this gentleman who spoke from Nakuru, talked about teaching. You know, the education system plays a very pivotal role in ensuring that certain things are done from a very early stage, so that in the years to come, it becomes a normal part of life. We talked about, remember we talking about the census?
Yep.
Right.
Well, this issue comes in. When children are being taught civic education, the subject of patriotism actually ought to take center stage as well. Yes.
It's got to be something that they're comfortable with from the very beginning, to then understand that, look, comfortable with in the sense that you're allowing this information to pass through. Getting to know who lives around you, getting to know that it's important to realize who your community really is, you know. Something from the very basic as, you know, saying hello to the person that you walk out of the house in the morning and you see first. Then you get that sense of relationship and understanding that if someone who comes into your neighborhood is new or is odd, you're likely to raise your eyebrows and take notice. And I think such things
And
are
they'll
important.
feel uncomfortable because they can see all the other 9 neighbors actually looking at me and treating me with suspicion. So they'll either be uncomfortable. If they have something to hide, they'll move out. Or if they have nothing to hide,
Then the
they'll
onus is
clarify.
upon them to also
They clear
extend
the
the hand.
air and extend a hand and show, you know, I'm a good neighbor.
Right.
This is who I am. The conversation continues on our social media platforms as well. Spice FM KE, Facebook, Twitter, and join the conversation by following our YouTube channel, Spice FM KE. It's coming up to 9 o'clock. In the next hour, we've been telling you we have a guest. This is Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adoloa, the Executive Director of Hatua Trust, is the Kenyan Church in Crisis. What a way to end the week by discussing this particular weighty matter. Good morning. It's now 9 o'clock.
Sugar and spice and everything nice. Spice FM.
Spice up your life. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi. Traffic.
All right, if you have to be on the Gong Road this morning, you might want to use the new bypass through Kibera. It's not completed yet, but it's been opened for vehicles to use. So there's an alternate route that you can use. All right, Mombasa Road, of course, still giving up those vibes that we're not really understanding where it's coming from. All the vehicles on the road today, all the way backed up, and still, interestingly enough, backed up as far back as Syokimau. And then we have the issue on the North Airport Road as well. there is absolute traffic on this road today. Hopefully it will stave off soon, but for now, traffic hour has extended by at least an hour this morning. All right, coming off of Thika Road, also not so bad. Trying to get to the Pangani underpass is not so difficult. It's moving slowly, but it's moving all the same. Waiaki Way, there's been traffic all week, and it's ending the week in an epic way. So we have traffic all the way from James Gishuru roundabout, and the connection with the Red Hill bypass is giving us some traffic as well. All right, that's what it looks like this Friday morning. If you see something out of the ordinary, do let us know. In half an hour or so, we'll give an update as per where we are. 0719-012-600 is the number to call. Spice FM KE is where you can find us on Twitter. Let us know what you see. We'll share that information. Make sure we keep moving, even if it's slow this Friday morning.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latin, agent provocateur, the man in the chair, seasoned journalist, news hound, a man who believes in punching up, not down. This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
2.5 minutes past 9. Good morning. How are you doing? This is The Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. We're broadcasting in Nairobi. We are on 94.4. We're in Mombasa on 87.9, 102.5 in Kisumu, 96.0 in Nakuru, 96.7 in Eldoret, 90.9 in Nyeri, 97.7 in Malindi. Of course, we live stream the show. I'll keep reminding you this because this is the first and only 24-hour audio-visual radio station. So you can watch us on YouTube at Spice FM KE. You can watch us on Facebook, Spice FM KE. And also you can watch us via our live stream on Twitter at Spice FM KE. We have a guest in the studio. Ndu, why don't you do the honors of introducing the guest?
Well, definitely this morning we are joined with Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa. And I think for many cases, especially when it comes to matters living and life, she doesn't need much introduction. But of course, we're talking today about an issue that seems to have taken Kenya by storm. When we see reports being written and indicators being given, then we know that there's a problem. And when we hear that the outcry has been quite something, then we have some questions to ask. Of course, today we're talking about the Kenyan church in crisis. And first of all, welcome, Reverend Linda. Thank you for joining us in the Situation Room this morning as we try to decipher what the problem is and where we are going and the cry that Kenyans have, or the different things that we've seen over time. Are we going too far when we say the church is in crisis?
I've tried to reflect a little bit on this, and here's my perspective on this. What I really think is happening here is that the nation is in crisis, and that the church's voice in this moment is not distinct, it's not clear, it's not providing the direction that the nation is crying out for. So I think it's fair to say that, because it is the role of the church to provide the leadership and direction and voice in times like these. Yeah, but I think what's really happening is that we've got a roiling situation in the nation, in the society as a whole, and the hope is that the church would be providing some direction, and that there is the Kenyans are experiencing some type of vacuum. Yeah.
Is that hope something that is well placed, or is it a hope that is going nowhere?
Let me answer you from two directions. Number one, I think the hope and the expectation is correctly placed. Why would Kenyans be looking to the church for direction? I think when you look through the scriptures and when you look through the Bible, there is a place for the voice of the community of God's people with regard to bringing in some sanity and some reason in times of difficulty. And so in that regard, the hope is not misplaced. Let me give you a specific and concrete example. In the book of Exodus, when the nation of Israel had gone into Egypt because there was a famine in the land and so forth, During the time of Joseph, they had settled in there. And then another Pharaoh, other leaders came up who did not know Joseph, and then they began to oppress the Israelites. And the Bible says that they were living under such hardship that they cried out to God. And it's in such a situation that God raises up a leader who is Moses, and he sends him to Pharaoh and to ask him to let the people go. In such a case, then you'd be right in saying the nation is not misplaced in its hopes that in a time of crisis, in times of hardship, difficulty, and struggle, that a voice should arise from among the community of God's people that should provide leadership and in some senses should elevate or should relieve this burden that the people are experiencing. So it's not misplaced.
Reverend, do you know what analogy has just done?
Talk to me. Talk to
It
me.
has explained why we have locusts.
We could be undergoing one of the plagues. You're a quick thinker. I didn't see that coming. I love it.
As Kenyans say, on a light note. Yes.
I hope we're not going to go through the other 9 plagues. They were pretty severe.
Oh my goodness.
Firstborns, be ready.
Firstborns, right.
Why would you say that, why would you see the reason as to why the church has been silent? Is it because who you're talking about, the men and women of God, have basically become too common, too human, too civilian, that they are also they're among those of us who are also calling out for a voice to come, and they're not really hearing the voice of God telling them this is what you need to do? Is it that the leadership of the church has lost its way, its understanding of its purpose?
Have they become too secular?
It's a fantastic question. Can I hazard 3 answers?
Yes.
3 possible answers. Number 1, the leaders of the church at any given time find themselves having to grapple with one dilemma. One of the dilemmas is the dilemma presented by one of the passages in Scripture, Romans 13, that calls for everyone to submit to the authorities that have been instituted. And so you will find that sometimes church leaders tend towards being conservative in pronouncing themselves on different issues because they don't want to be perceived to be confrontational with regard to what they understand to be the authorities that have been placed in position by God. It is also not the agenda of the church or the job of the church to create a situation of anarchy. And so in many senses, they attempt, I think, to support and not to antagonize. And then some pastors actually do find themselves in that dilemma. I actually had a few conversations with colleagues and I asked, this person was in your presence. Why didn't you call certain issues out? Why do you surrender your pulpits and don't speak back? Because many times we find political leaders coming into the church space. And my thought when I was speaking to that colleague was, you have every opportunity at that point because they're in your presence to have conversation. And they quoted this scripture to me, let everybody be subject to the authorities. So it's one dilemma. And I think it's an honest theological dilemma that church leaders find themselves having to grapple with. The second one is this. How do church leaders engage with the issues and the lived realities of the people without being completely co-opted into political agendas? You cannot pronounce yourself on everything.
Yeah.
You cannot pronounce yourself on everything. And if you do, how do you make sure that you have not left your own station unmanned so that you have now run completely into matters state and you have become the watchdog of all and of everything? Let me give you a third dilemma and then I'll have you, respond to these things and determine whether you want to validate them or rubbish them altogether. The third one is that as a church, and I want to suggest that for me, this one is perhaps the most dilemmic of all dilemmas. Allow me to create a word. It's the most dilemmic dilemma. Is that we as the church have to resolve our ethnic identities and denominational identities before we can begin to speak nationally. I feel like when issues arise, many a times we are unable to stand apart from our ethnic identities or even our denominational identities. And so these are the dynamics color the issues. And it becomes then difficult for us to speak ecumenically or together and nationally. So this is my, suggestion with regard to the silences of the church.
The 3 of them make sense to me. None of them is justified, however. Because I see, yes, we are human beings. So, of course, as a pastor, you have an ethnic background. outside the church, you relate with people from, from various quarters. You have an ethnic background and you have a denominational side of it. But you also understand your role. When you stand on that pulpit, you actually are not Luo, Kikuyu, Kamba. You are not. You're a pastor.
Try telling that to your congregants.
But they know that.
At the height, they know that. But at
When
the height
you're
of the
preaching to them-
2017 election, it would have been difficult to say anything without being perceived as being
You'd either be
partisan.
you'd be a sellout.
Not to this or the other.
Either
Yes.
a sellout to one group or another.
Or-
And the horror of it is that by the time you've made some headway in your work in ministry or in your profession or whatever you want to call it, people already know your surname. It's difficult in crisis now to change and say, oh, by the way, I'm a Samburu, so anything I say doesn't really fall on either side of the divide. And you want to believe that I sincerely hoped for that. It just didn't happen, didn't materialize.
But it's true. When you look at the Reverend Alexander Muge, you're giving us the example yesterday. The Reverend Alexander Muge, he was Kalenjin, Moi was Kalenjin, but he stood out and spoke. At the same time, we had Archbishop Manasseh Kuria in this other side, Nairobi, speaking. But yes, you could see Manasseh Kuria, Kikuyu, Alexander Muge, Kalenjin, but
There was
quickly,
also Okulu on the other side.
and there was Okulu on the other side. But you
Yes.
quickly look beyond that and you see, well, he is not saying we the people, us people or our side. He's saying, as a man of God, as a Christian community, this is what is right, this is what is wrong. And I think if the church leaders actually went ahead and said, it doesn't matter how you view me, when I'm coming to preach to you, you don't look at me as, oh, now this Reverend Linda, the way she's talking to me is
By the
because
way,
she's
there was Mwana Nzeki.
Ndingi Mwana Nzeki.
Yes.
We don't look at them as Kamba, Kikuyu. We know at the back of our minds that's what
Actually-
they are. At the back of our minds, we know that's what they are. But
That
when
was
they're
a
making
different
that
dispensation, I would
Yes.
argue.
later.
At a different time.
Yes.
But he was still very active during those days.
But in terms
as a bishop.
in terms of fueling the conversation, because a lot of times we're asking ourselves, and this is the question, in terms of participation, how participatory should the church be in national matters? Because it's a bone of contention. Where
Ndu, could I take you back a bit before we get to that?
sure.
I want to address what the Reverend has said directly. From where I sit, you seem to be referring to Christian immaturity. The maturity of the Christian brotherhood, sisterhood, congregation. Why am I saying this? Because if I read or if I recollect what the Bible teaches well, it didn't talk about Luos and Samburus, but it talked about Greeks. It talks about Jews.
Jews and
it says
Gentiles.
that the moment you subscribe to this particular way of life, you are neither of these.
Yeah.
Yes, so if that particular concept hasn't been internalized, does it not point to immaturity?
We're not going forward.
I think it's a fair point. People keep throwing out this statistic about the constituency of Christians in this nation. I mean, the popular statistic is 80%. I have to agree with you. Is it really 80%? Is it really 80% of people who really subscribe to this thing and have internalized it and consider the claims of Christ to be paramount in their lives? I think we have a lot of church goers. We have a lot of church attenders. I don't know how many Christians we actually have. And even those church goers and church attenders, I mean, I don't have a current statistic, but at some point in the 80s, Daystar had done a study, just a dipstick, finding out the percentage of people who attend church on an average Sunday morning. It was 16%. It was 16%. And so even if you say that that's very conservative, and let's find some sort of middle point between 80% and 16%, you're looking at about
80% is declared, not necessarily. See, church attendance now got specific.
Yeah.
Okay, you say you're this.
And you take action.
Yes. Do you strive towards meeting some tenets of this faith that you claim to have? And that's where attendance comes in. And indeed, if you took the dynamics even further and brought in gender, you'd find some interesting statistics.
correct.
Yes, and you'd find there's one particular gender that attends this particular church more than this other gender. Yes.
You really make an interesting point. Let me just tease it out a little bit. You're moving us towards the fact that the church and the voice of the church and the impact of the church is not a function of the church leadership alone. I think if I were to tease out what you're saying
yes,
to its logical conclusion, I feel like that's the direction you're taking.
I am taking that direction.
Without absolving the leadership of their unique role and responsibility, without absolving them. I have to say, though, that where we are at as Christians, I feel like the Christian citizens need to also take responsibility and to demand. I think they need to grow up, number one. They need to grow up. And that, which is what you said, by talking about
precisely what I said.
Maturity.
Because if you are calling me, if you want me to come to your pulpit and only tell you how God will bless you, in a sense, allow you to pop your spiritual vitamins on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It means that you're not interested in when I want to come to the pulpit and talk to you about harder issues of structural justice, about righteousness in the nation. You don't want those things. When you want to come for the Kesha for the overnight, December 31st, you just want to tell me how I see this will be a year of great change and transformation. I see your situation turning around. I see God settling you and establishing you. I mean, it means that we are sort of kind of on the periphery of this thing. We haven't really begun to eat the meat of this thing.
We're still drinking milk, as
We're
it were.
still drinking milk.
But
so
then
you do have a point.
It seems to be, though, that is what a lot of people feed on. If we look then at a lot of people who go to church, and we're talking about literally walking into the building, people are going to feed off of this milk. This is what they want. So that I've gone through Monday to Saturday, I get to Sunday, and what I want to hear is these blessings that you're going to pronounce upon me. And I also feel that a lot of church leaders then have taken advantage of this to get more numbers into the building for whatever reason. This is then the crux of what they teach.
They're responding to their
audience, but still, I don't think that absolves them from the responsibility of making it work. So then a lot of people feel that, okay, well, church, I'm not going to go because at the end of the day, it's prosperity preaching, or it is just the blessings that you will get out of this season of famine. Your life will become better. How then do we reconcile that against this maturity that we're saying needs to happen? If these numbers of 80, I think it was 84% even at some point, are actually going to be true.
I have to say, as I said, I acknowledged his point, which was that we cannot overlook the fact that you've got the Christian constituency wanting to hear a certain kind of message. But at the same time, I said we can't absolve leaders of the church of their responsibility. Christian leaders need to understand, and we need to remind ourselves constantly that we get our marching orders from above. Ultimately, this is not a business. It's not the sort of place where you say you're going to sell what people want to buy. If you have your marching orders and your mandate from God and you're accountable to Him ultimately, you need to keep that at the forefront of your mind in such a way that His dictates, His framework shapes your ministry. Let me give you an example. Ezekiel 34 talks about how God is going to be very tough on the shepherds. He talks about how the role of the shepherds is to strengthen those who are weak, look for those who are lost, kind of round them up and provide for them. And then it actually challenges the shepherds of Israel at that time who were feasting on the sheep themselves. And then God talks about the fact that He's going to do away with them. And so when we remember those kinds of things, actually the net effect is that it should call us back to our senses. This is not a marketplace.
Or at the very least, have some of these churches who propel this other message shut down.
We need to go into that.
Good. We will get into that.
I will want you to repeat that particular book of the Bible and the chapter because there's something I want to say about it. Yes.
We have in the studio Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa. She's the Executive Director of Hatua Trust. She is a pastor. We are basically discussing the church in Kenya. Excuse me. We are discussing the church in Kenya. Is the church in Kenya in crisis? That's the conversation we're having. It's 19 minutes past 9. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah.
You're listening to Spice FM. 96.1 Spice FM. Kisi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
In the Situation Room this morning, Eric Latif, C.T. Muga Nduoko, and on the hot seat this morning is Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa. You were to repeat that verse again because C.T. Muga wants to go further into it.
Yes, and the dire consequences that would befall these leaders, that's the part I mean.
That's the part he was interested in, just for clarification purposes.
Here it goes. Ezekiel 34 says this. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Mm-hmm. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, you clothe yourselves with wool, you slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. Let me skip to verse 7. It says, therefore you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, because my flock lacks a shepherd, therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from those roles.
I want you to read it so that the Kenyan leadership who are listening to this understand that there will be consequences for the things that they are doing, because it looks to me like this particular verse, it's like it is a mirror image of what the leadership, a good portion of this leadership in this country have been doing. Thank you. We can now move on.
It also provides a historical perspective.
Yes, it does.
That even in faith, this is not the first time. We see this all the time. This was very many years ago when the church leaders or the religious leaders were doing exactly the same thing that we see religious leaders also doing today.
Hence this complaint.
Today that people are feeling, well, they are doing their own thing and not addressing us. Brings us to the issue of, that prosperity message. People are coming to church, and what we are getting is that prosperity. I'm speaking a blessing. I am prophesying this is going to happen to you.
And if they didn't prophesy, they've not preached.
And they haven't preached. And then everything else is sort of put in the back burner. If we look at how the church has progressed in the country, there are those that we call the legacy traditional churches, the mainstream churches, the Anglican, Catholic, PCA, AIC, Baptist, Methodist, and the rest. And then we have down the new evangelical churches. A lot of people who complain about church will say it's all about prosperity gospel nowadays. Why is it that we have this? Are you saying it's because this is what the people want, so give the people what they want?
Okay, let me jump into that. But before I do that, let me also, I thought to myself as I was coming here that I also need to say, bad news makes news. Mm-hmm. And let me say this in humility, now that I'm in the Situation Room and you guys could throw me out. Media loves controversy. Can I say this just before I get into your question on prosperity gospel? Yes. Media loves controversy. So I thought to myself, it would be fair when I come to talk about this and we're reflecting on the church and its role and in crisis. There is many a hard-working pastor whose ministry has been marked by integrity, who has made the sacrifices and done time for a long time, who's just putting in a good day's work day after day, year on year, and it never makes the news. I thought that it would be fair to say that. It's kind of like any other sector or any other profession, the legal profession, for instance. You always hear when somebody runs off with a client's money. But there are many other good lawyers who actually put in a decent day's work. And so I just thought, let me throw that in so that it doesn't look like, vilifying every work.
That message has arrived.
Let us surprise you by saying we actually agree with you.
We agree with you. That message sits here.
And I know you know, but I just thought to myself, for the benefit of everybody who's listening out there, they need to hear that we're, sort of there's a balance here. But anyway, on to the question on the prosperity gospel. I haven't reflected extensively on this because people keep publishing and writing. But I think that the prosperity gospel is valid in some places, in some ways. I think that it is a response to the many social ills in our part of the world. You don't need to preach a message of prosperity gospel in a country that is affluent or in a country where people are not living below the poverty line. It is only when I am lacking in employment and lacking in opportunities in my country that you need to call out people who are praying for visas and who are looking for the next ticket out to the next country where they can have a shot at making it in life. And so we need to also, again, be clear and just have clarity about our context. When you look at the unemployment statistics, when you look at the situation of our young people, a friend of mine who's a social commentator said that this generation is facing the most anxious financial future of any. He makes the point that at 29, his father was already married with 3 children, was already, espousing a leadership position in society. I think he was a deputy head teacher, and he was already at the place at 29 where he had purchased a plot of land. In other words, beginning to invest for the future.
Yeah.
And yet our young people today, within the age range of 18 to 35, one would consider them to be failing in the 5 social markers of what is called adulting. People are struggling to finish school. People are struggling to find a job. People are struggling to find, to marry. Maybe you've got a girlfriend, but you'll just keep drinking coffee or eating popcorn or the cheapest thing that you get, taking her for a walk because you can afford.
Right.
You can't even afford to do anything beyond that.
Yep.
Just take her for walks, and the clock is ticking.
And we're walking.
You're walking. And then the other thing is you want to start a family. Even if you get married, you're like, hold on a minute. Let's just settle and establish ourselves first. And then investing for the future is even a rumor. Something that a previous generation was able to do by the age of 29. And so it is in this context where people have short-term, unrelated internships, if they have anything at all, that you have the context where the prosperity gospel is also finding space in people's lives. It is in such a situation where we want to come to church and be told, goodness and mercy shall follow you. It is true, but you need it now like never before.
But Ndu had actually even alluded to this. So some of them, some preachers have taken advantage of that. Basically, it's like preying on the vulnerable.
And that is all we
You
will
have
hear.
seen that people are vulnerable. This is what they need to hear. And I come in and I call myself a preacher, and this is what I'm going to give them, without necessarily feeding their spiritual nourishment.
I think it's a fair point. The image that comes to my mind is there was a certain time when Matatu started having music. There was a time when they didn't. And then the newer versions would come and they'd have all these amazing colors and they had music. And those were the ones that would draw people. So I almost think that it's a situation like that. People do want to go to a place where they feel their felt need is being addressed. So if you come to a space where I have the platform and I'm talking to you about structural justice, and somebody else is telling you how goodness and mercy will follow you, this is the turnaround weekend. Things are going to change for you this weekend. After this prayer, your life will never be the same again. Who are they going to go and listen to? Is it me with the righteousness and justice, or is it the other person who's saying this is the turnaround, complete crossover, prophetic crossover, Kesha?
Your question, this is where your question just sits sliding nicely.
Yes, because we do have this situation where you have people who actually take that thing even further. They even give you a timetable within which you can actually receive your blessing or receive your healing.
Miracle
I
Wednesday.
have been of the view that they should be held accountable for these things, because you can't keep peddling false promises. If someone says 10:30, come and receive your miracle, and I come at 10:30 and my miracle is not
ready
received.
and waiting for me.
This question is so dicey. Every time I listen to you, I want to continue to make disclaimers. The challenge with our industry, like any other, presumably, allow me to call it industry or sector or whatever, is that there are so many people peddling what is false, and that it bears remarkable resemblance to what is true. I cannot, in all conscience, sit here and disavow the fact that when you come into Martyr's Church, you are dealing with the supernatural. Can God come through for people? Yes. Does he turn situations around miraculously? Yes. Does he even owe us any explanations? No. And maybe even if he did, we wouldn't understand it. The problem is then that you do have a lot of other stuff that is being peddled that is not the truth. And you raise an interesting question of accountability. I want to throw this one back to you. How would you hold people accountable in this setting, and specifically even for false promises? You're smiling in a fashion that makes me think I've just walked into the lion's den.
Yes, you have.
No worries. Let's do this.
Keep walking.
Let's do this. Peradventure, God will deliver me like he did Daniel. Hebrews says Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. So let's do this. I mean, talk to me. How would you hold people accountable? Say if somebody, not I, but if somebody says this is the timeline,
this is the weekend,
this is the timeline, this is the miracle, this is the weekend miracle, and it doesn't happen, what would you do? Should such people be thrown into cell? What should happen?
Actually, we've looked at this thing from the perspective of politicians who, unfortunately, a country like ours, we have very low thresholds for actually judging any moral standard that they should have. And people say, well, we expect them to lie. We don't expect the same of religious leaders.
No.
Now, this is where the problem comes in. And then religious leaders tend not to be judged with the same yardstick because of the same element of faith. If we look at the description of faith in Hebrews, it leaves you a little gobstopped because you'll say, okay, if this is the rule that this person is applying, then he may not necessarily be lying because it's not entirely in his hands. But where the lie comes in is when you say it as though you are in charge and you're capable of providing it. You state it as though it's a fact. Just bring yourself here, 11:30, miracle, you will receive. Now, that's where the lie comes in. If you say, we are going to pray for miracles, there is no question. There will be no issue. That's what you're doing. But they say, come and receive.
So those that do that,
Wednesday
and that's what she's
miracle
asking,
service,
that Linda is
kind of thing
asking,
we're talking about.
how do you hold them to account?
Oh, I'm getting there.
He's warming up.
Yes, I'm
Yeah, this
getting
is
there.
this one.
I am saying, then what we call secular law comes into being. Now we remove the element of belief and we say that you, my friend, are selling things which don't exist. And that now becomes a criminal act because essentially it's not just dishonesty. No.
It's fraud.
It is fraud. Yes. That is what we now charge you with. Because you cannot promise people who believe. It's even worse when you then promise them that if they take their hard-earned money and give it to you, there's a certain multiplication process that will take place. But you carefully avoid the fish and the loaf story, or except with reference to the fact that these things have happened in the past. Okay? Again, fraud. It is not, you don't have the power or the ability to make that thing come into being.
And accepting that and presenting that as
Yes.
truth is what is
you can
extremely
represent
important.
the person who is the manufacturer of these things,
But
but
not you.
state it so. Stop giving yourself a role that you actually don't have.
The conversation continues at 28 minutes to 10 o'clock. We have in the studio on the hot seat this morning is Dr. Linda Ochola Adoloa. She is the Executive Director of Hatua Trust. She's also a pastor in the Anglican community. She is talking about the church in Kenya, and that's what we're discussing. Very many aspects of the church. We'll be opening up the phone lines in a short while at 0719-012-600. The conversation continues. Let's first take a look at what's happening on the roads. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah!
You're listening to Spice FM. Spice FM, Nakuru. Traffic.
So the folks along Feather Nyayo and Airport Road have decided that they will also join the foray, and we could see some protests from Monday. So enjoy the good traffic that you have now, because they've decided that if they've seen this has worked in Wiki Kasarani, perhaps they can get some answers as well. All right. And it seems that the folks in Kawangware, which you mentioned earlier this morning, Eric, seem that they also want to join this. Lorry catches fire at some parts way up on Mombasa Road, and that has caused some traffic as well. Not an explanation for the heightened traffic that we see this morning, but that is a happening situation right now. Okay, coming off Thika Road, not so bad right now because it has, of course, eased off as we've passed traffic hour. Getting into the CBD is a lot easier. Of course, Ngong Road has cleared up now, getting to the City Mortuary roundabout and then entering into the CBD, not a problem either. So yes, traffic hour is over. For those parts where we see the remnants, you will get where you're going just in time. You see anything that we should spread the word about, Spice FM KE is the Twitter handle, or give us a call, 0719 012 600.
96.1 Spice FM. Kisi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
As we continue the conversation with Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa, let's also bring you some breaking news. The MP for Embakasi East, Babu Owino, has been arrested. Not for derogatory statements made, but for a shooting incident at a club in Kilimani. So he's been arrested. He's been taken in over a shooting incident at a club in Kilimani.
Is it the only one who's been arrested?
For today.
Over that particular incident? We'll find out as we go on.
Okay. Now that you brought in the politicians, maybe I need to give you a little background. We've had discussions in this very studio about the peddling of lies by politicians. And why I call it peddling of lies is when politicians stand up and make promises about development that hopefully in Kenyan style will bring to people, and years down the line nothing happens. We have been of the view that that amounts to a lie, and it continues. There's always with every election cycle in the process. We even give examples of really senior government officials talking about projects that they said would be completed by a certain time, not completed. And then we even had examples of people who are in politics saying that about the same government that, in my area, where I come from, where I'm the leader, we have 128 projects that the government said they would complete. They are not completed. And it goes on. And we said, no. It ought to be actionable because they don't need to make those promises. You don't even need to say you're going to do this. You could just keep quiet. Or you could just say that one thing which you know for sure you are able to do.
And stick with it.
And this example goes on. Now, when you have a situation where the church joins in this fray and they're also being characterized by statements that cannot be held to be true, that's why I said they become secular. And that is putting it really politely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I wish you would go for the jugular and just call it what it is. I can see it in your eyes and in your throat.
It wants to come out.
Yeah, maybe it is the title Reverend that's holding you back. I hereby give you my pastoral permission to proceed without fear. Permission to speak freely is granted. Let me say this. I really appreciate what you've said about politicians and given it as a background and then come into the religious leadership. So let me just start from where you've started from. With regard to the Kenyan situation and the fact that you've got political leaders who constantly tell us that they're going to do X, Y, and Z and don't deliver on their promises and still manage to get elected, I want to kind of circle back to a point that you had made earlier. We talked about immaturity with regard to the church. I also want to suggest that there is immaturity with regard to our citizenry. And certain articles that I've read have also talked about the fact that when a society is low on trust, it tends to over-legislate. I think that is what is happening in Kenya. We have laws upon laws upon laws, and commissions upon commissions upon commissions that have been set up to deal with all these things, anti-corruption and the rest, all manner of interventions at structural level. And we are finding that despite all of these things that have been created and put in place, you still have a society, a runaway, in terms of morality, runaway, an immoral society, completely immoral society. My 2 cents on this is that you also have a situation where the citizenry is complicit in this situation. I mean, I cannot control your lying to me. I cannot control what comes out of your mouth. But surely I have the power to remove my ears by commanding my legs to leave this room. I don't have to listen. I don't have to buy the things that you're saying. So I want to say that about our political leadership. And then let me move quickly to my sector. It's best to stay in your space. Let everyone stick to his own lane.
Lanes, please.
Let me speak about my own lane. I want to suggest also that when you see a situation where people are constantly having promises made to them that don't come through, and they are essentially in the hands of unscrupulous leaders, and they continue to entertain, allow me to speak with stronger language than you did, they entertain that nonsense. It tells me that perhaps you were right in your first calling out of the issue when you said that there's an immaturity and we maybe have our own selves to blame. We have no excuse, I think, as Christians to continue being naive and gullible. The first time you tell me that this thing will happen by 10:30, perhaps I have no track record with you, or I'm not aware of your track record of reliability.
Yeah.
How do you justify my sitting in that space on an ongoing basis, even
And
when I
still
have
come back
seen
next
that there
Benefit
are
of doubt.
challenges?
A benefit of doubt.
Benefit of doubt?
Second
Surely,
time, third time,
how many times?
until immaturity.
Until immaturity. I thought you were going to quote a scripture to me, at which point you'd have tied my hands. Let me allow me to do the quoting of scriptures. But let me say this. I listened to a presentation by a professor of law, Professor Kameri Mbote, and she was talking about the limits of formal law. Because you're talking about, you're basically calling such pastors fraudsters.
Yes.
Let me use your word.
Actually, yes.
You're treading so carefully when it comes to matters sacred. But you've called it fraudsters, and I call them fraudsters. I don't think you're wrong. But she talks about the limits of formal law, and she talks about the fact that you can legislate and legislate and legislate. How many people can the prisons in Kenya accommodate? Maybe let me put it like that. That's where I'm going. If we are going to throw people into the slammer, every time Eric tells a lie, Ndani. Ndu, Ndani. Linda, Ndani. I mean, so who's going to be left out here?
Right.
There must be other social norms and customs that are able to govern and shape our spaces. Let me give you an example that she gave from her presentation. She said that with regard to the Kenyan law, women can inherit land. But then she said in many places, custom still rules. Women cannot inherit land. So there are
In
other...
most places.
In most places. Thank you for being very candid about that and giving it to us real. The fact of the matter is that there are many places where custom holds the water. And my suggestion is that in spaces like the church, do we not have recourse as the people of God, as the community of God's people? And we can only come to that place where we ourselves have a high sense of ownership of the space. We have clarity with regard to the word of God. In other words, we are even reading it for ourselves.
Yep.
So that when we begin to sense that somebody is kind of skating on thin ice, we are able to speak back and call it out. Some of the things I've seen, honestly, online on Kenyan TV, there is no justification. There is no justification for some of the kinds of abuse that the Kenyans are enduring at the hands of religious leaders. And yet these same constituencies continue to go back time and time again.
To those same leaders.
I think the point I'm trying to make here is that you cannot legislate morality. And there is a responsibility on both sides.
Okay, but still, there can be an attempt to regulate the church, regulate religion.
Okay.
We've seen it happen in Rwanda. We've seen, attempts even here.
In terms of the
where
licenses
where
that
the
are
church
given.
leaders have come back and fought hard. Among the things, if you start from the basics and say, if you want to be a minister of the word of God, then you must also, meet some certain minimum
Basic
requirements.
criteria,
Basic criteria for you to do this, for you to get yourself licensed, for you to operate. Why is it that the church would fight so hard against and push back against the issue of regulation?
On that one, I
It's
have
like
to
fighting
say...
transparency.
Yeah, on that one, I have to say I am in agreement. A certain friend of mine gives an analogy and talks about the fact that you would never let untrained personnel go into a hospital to perform surgery.
Right.
He makes this analogy. And then he says, however, with regard to matters church and matters spiritual, as soon as somebody wakes up and says, I feel the call, the next day you're admitted, we bandika you a title. And nowadays, even it's not just humble pastors.
We make you bishop.
Apostle. Super apostle. I mean, I do feel that there are excesses. I think I'm just trying to acknowledge that there are excesses and that I would not be opposed to some type of regulation. I think the question then comes again, who regulates?
Right.
Who regulates?
Why can't the church regulate itself?
I think it should regulate itself. That's where I was going.
Because if you don't regulate yourself and you allow the government to come in, and then you know who's going to regulate you? Kenya Bureau of Standards.
Yeah.
God forbid.
Well, yes. I mean, after all, remember...
And we'll each have the KEBS mark of
Yes,
certification.
the gospel is a product, okay? And they will set standards by which this particular
And the Kenya
product
National
can be
Examinations
consumed.
Council, whatever you've done, it must be NEC certified. All
Yes.
those things. It's important that we
I
get
think
to
it needs
a
to
point where the church
self-regulate.
comes together, and
Yeah.
the media did the same. when there was issues of the government trying to regulate the media came back and said, all right, so let's do this. Let's organize ourselves. We're going to regulate ourselves.
Yeah.
That's how come we have the Media Council of Kenya. Law Society of Kenya is a means of self-regulating. All these institutions have that. I think it's about time that, and it requires leadership. It requires somebody in the Christian faith and leadership to actually say, you guys, let's sit together, let's make the move. Let's take the initiative to start some sort of regulation.
And I think that there are some initiatives going on. I do not know all of them, but one particular group called Hesabika Trust that I am familiar with at this point is almost to the final stages of a draft document for governance for
Accountability
churches.
Trust, is it?
Yeah, for governance for churches. So that's a good thing. And I kind of perused through that document just briefly this week, and it talks about what are some guidelines for churches with regard to raising funds. What are some guidelines for churches with regard to their boards? And the average pastor who has been through theological college like I have to say, I didn't learn that, about boards and their role in theological
Governance.
college. Those are things that I learned on the job afterwards. Now, forget about even that pastor who hasn't been through, those basic minimum requirements that you're talking about, hasn't been to a Bible college and has a sense of calling. So there is some attempt. I know, as I said, this one body that is trying to do that. I think there could be others, but it has been difficult. I do want to suggest, though, strongly to the church leadership with humility, that the time has come. And we cannot put this off any longer, or we risk exactly what you're saying, an external body coming in to regulate us, which is fraught with its own challenges. In fact, the scripture says that if we do not clean our own house, it talks about the fact that righteousness must begin with the house of God. We must be able to clean our own selves up first so that we have the credibility to speak
clean
into
up
the other sectors of society.
In looking at the running of a nation, I mean, just briefly, how do you think then the church should be involved? How close should these two relate?
Church and state. We'll come into that. The Reverend Linda will be responding to this. Out of the short break. Forget it. It's 13 minutes to 10 o'clock. This is the Situation Room, is Kenya's biggest conversation. Also opening up the phone lines now, 0719-012-600. We'll pick one or two calls in the studio this morning. Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa. She is a reverend in the Anglican Communion. She's also the executive director of Hatua Trust. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah!
You're listening to Spice FM. Online, mobile, and on radio. This is Spice FM. .1 Spice FM. Kisi. 96.1 Spice FM. Kisi.
Let's go to the phone lines because we have Sami calling in from Magarini. Good morning, Sami.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning to you.
Yes, I'm quite fine. Yeah, I have some suggestions maybe for the bishop, if I'm not wrong.
The title of bishop has now been conferred upon you.
Sammy, why didn't you just go directly to Pope? Why did you stop at bishop?
Linda is fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sammy.
I think by going by the BBI report is that they suggested that the charges will have to be registered, and then whatever they'll be doing business, any business that the churches will be doing will have to be actually audited for. So whatever funds, whatever rambles that will go on in church, they have to be published and put on the wall so that the congregants or the members have to see and scrutinize if indeed the money that they contributed actually went to whatever purposes they were intended for. I think that's one point I congratulate BBI. But also I must say that we remember Karl Marx when he said that get rid of these churches, which are the opium of the people and the soul of the soulless. I think we are having commercial churches. Even if when you go to Europe, you see most of the churches have closed down. People have gone home. They just remain with the Biblia or the Bible. They read on their own because of this such a commercialization of churches.
Yeah.
They need a lot of money than what we get from our own sources. We need money to purchase some of our items, food, clothes, and whatever. But they demand more than what they should actually be demanding. We know they have to survive on our side or the
So there are
offering,
costs.
but they're demanding a lot of money. So I think they should be regulated and they should be kept on toes and to be responsible for whatever money that we contribute to churches. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sami. Talking about financing and management of finances, we've actually had that conversation here. And, it's even been floated here that how about just ensuring that all churches draw from the same kitty? So that's all taxpayers. Like, was it in Germany? Where all taxpayers...
Oh, it's not just Germany.
In many
there are
other countries.
Where there is a tax that if you subscribe to a faith, you don't actually need to go to church to give the tithe. You are taxed.
You're taxed. And then the church just draws the money from there.
No, they don't necessarily draw the money from there. That money exists and it could be used for development. It could be used for all sorts of things. Yes. That is government tax. It doesn't mean that when people go to church, they then don't give.
Because you see what Sami is saying, that churches are becoming a burden, a financial burden on people.
On who exactly?
That's what he's saying.
I know, and I'm asking the question because churches, how are they a burden? Because this whole process is voluntary, really.
Kabisa. That's an excellent point.
You don't have to go.
There are churches, and you even talked about, there are churches where you go and the pastor says, if you don't have, for those with, now the basket is going around for those with 1,000, now the basket is going around for those with 500s and with hundreds, and now, thank you very much. The rest of you guys, you feel the pressure of how much you need to contribute. It actually does happen in this country.
And what stops you from leaving that church if you're uncomfortable?
Which is really where we had reached. Let me say something with regard to Sami's...
I like what the pastor says. I just don't like when he asks for money.
You want to be blessed, but you now don't want to chotter for the blessing.
I know, yes.
Which tells you that many of us are very double-minded. Here's my humble submission to his contribution. In the churches I've worked for, actually, the income of the church has been properly handled by trained finance and accounting practitioners, and audited accounts have been published every year. And so, and I don't see that it has stifled our ministry at all. So on that one, I agree with him. The truth of the matter is that the church is an organization like any other. It's an interesting one because it is fully human but fully divine. But with regard to the fact of our humanity, we must put in the controls, financial controls, like any other organization. For instance, as a pastor of a local congregation, I was not the one, I sort of worked out the budget, but I sent that budget to HQ, and that budget was scrutinized by others. And then, whereas I could write requisitions together with the staff team of my small congregation, I wasn't the same one who was able to do all sorts of things like actually going to the bank and getting the money myself, taking it there myself, accessing it myself. There are all sorts of controls that make it possible for us to really to really establish that we are running a credible outfit here. I don't see the place for us to object.
Linda, in that ministry, that was moving closer to what we call the mainstreams.
Okay.
The others don't. And you know this.
You
very
throw
well.
the offering bag in the boot,
yes,
and drive off in a cloud of dust.
Yeah, in terms of accountability, in terms of what was done, then I mean, it's been really, honestly, some of the things that we've heard is mind-boggling, and it's really quite disturbing that we get to that point where the offering that people are giving, of course, which they hope that you would chotter for the blessing, is now something that is being used for totally different things.
And these are churches where the entire practice of that church borders on cultism.
Yeah.
And the leader of that church just stops short of calling themselves God.
Yeah. We have excesses. I cannot deny that. I mean, I'm living in the same context that you are.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we have a problem. I think he's right that I don't know whether there is, I don't know whether we are heading there to the place where these things will be regulated for the churches externally. I hope we don't get there. I hope we can get our act together before we get to that point. But we do have a problem. I, for instance, have major problems when I see religious leaders living at a standard that is far above that of their congregants. There is nowhere that I see in scripture that makes it possible for religious leaders to live a life of opulence in a context like this. It doesn't make sense to me that people can own a jet. In fact, what happens at that point is that it becomes impossible for you to challenge the political leaders.
Yeah. Right.
Brings me back to Ndu's question. How far should the church be involved with the state? Allow me to allude to a story again in the Old Testament. You have a story where there was this guy called King Ahab.
It's Friday.
It's okay, it's Eric.
Thank you. So Ahab had a really super kind of evil wife called Jezebel. People know this name. And this woman was from a foreign nation, and so she did not fear God, Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, and didn't subscribe to the 10 Commandments and everything. And so Ahab, one day while he was walking around, he saw a vineyard next to his palace, and he was like, Kaprot, I like it. This thing looks good. 2020, let me start off the year on a good note, expand my investments. And he wanted this, and he spoke to this guy. The owner of this vineyard was called Naboth. Now, there was a law in Israel that said you could not sell land. You could not sell land, and the reason was because there was an intention to preserve approximately access to the means of producing wealth. And so land was retained by families.
They wanted to maintain equity.
Exactly. And so Naboth says to the king, God forbid that I should sell the inheritance of my fathers. And of course, he's got a long-term view of things. When I'm gone, my kids will have something.
Yeah.
And so Ahab goes to his house, and he's in a foul mood. He's sulking. He will not eat. He turns his face to the wall. And Jezebel comes and asks, what's going on? What's up? And he gives this story. And then she goes to she says to him, she snaps her fingers and says, nonsense, what a Jew, how a Jew. Let me sort this thing out for you. And she basically compromises the elders and the courts of justice, and she's able to accuse this guy falsely, get him executed, and then tells her husband, now go and take the land.
Now you have the land.
Now enter Elijah, who was the prophet. And just as this guy is going for an evening walk on his newly acquired property, Elijah says, comes into this space, and Ahab asks, what are you doing here? The long and short of it is I'm saying the church should be involved. It should be involved to the extent of speaking truth to power. It should be involved.
Very, very powerful words. As we conclude,
and it's difficult for us to do that when we compromise ourselves by living the same lives of opulence through gains that people cannot explain where we got them from.
Questionable.
Questionable
gains.
gains.
Absolutely.
Final question before you leave.
All right.
Is there anywhere in the Bible where it says, God helps those who help themselves?
No.
City. Justified.
One is a popular saying, but it's not a biblical saying.
So where does it come from? Is just somebody?
I tried explaining this to my
to Eric.
Yes, to these agnostic colleagues of mine, and I told them that saying came from the first president of the country, and he himself quoted God. Maybe God had told him personally, but people assume therefore it was in the Bible.
God helps
those who help themselves.
The Bible does say faith without works is dead. It also says that whoever does not provide for his family is worse than an infidel. It also says that we should work with our hands and not be busybodies.
Well, should also not eat.
It also says that. So.
Thank you very much, Reverend. We have had in the studio Reverend Dr. Linda Ochola Adolwa. She is the Executive Director of Hatua Trust. Thank you for joining us. We'll invite you shortly, in a couple of weeks, to come and let's take stock of what you've been saying. Part 2 of this.
Asante.
As we go into the weekend, we want to thank you very much for tuning into the Situation Room this week between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. every Monday to Friday. Say goodbye, CT.
Goodbye.
And happy weekend.
Happy weekend.
That's all.
Goodbye. Happy weekend. I follow instructions.
Good. All those going to the political rallies this weekend in the name of BBI and the rest, we wish you all the best. See you again here on Monday, bright and early. You'll have, of course, the drive and the adults in the room later this afternoon. Between now and then, you'll have uninterrupted music. This is The Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. We broadcast this show every weekday between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. We'll see you again on Monday. My name is Eric Latif. We have CT Muga Nduoko, and we've had our guest on the hot seat this morning,